Mark will be there for movie night. What is up, Cory? So here's my question. Starting off right with the spicy.
I'm not late, by the way.
You're not late. You're actually 1 minute early, which is exactly on time. That is the best time you could ever show up to anything. Is exactly 1 minute early, because you get to claim that you're early. You cannot possibly be late, but also you don't inconvenience anybody by being like too early.
Yeah, I think I have a track record of being reliable.
I'm just fucking with you.
I know.
1 minute early is the perfect time. And this is why I actually love Cory. He's sweet. So in the name of sweetness, I'm going to ask you, how do you feel about Abercrombie & Fitch gargantuan model that I just showed?
Yes, I was listening, paying attention. And obviously, you know, I have my own thoughts in terms of like, yeah, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like people should aspire to that health outcome. But I think there's a reason. I think there's a reason why we're being more accepting of various body types to hopefully promote acceptance and not stigmatization. I see that as a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that like there's not any reliable data that a stigmatization actually works in terms of like preventing people from obesity. Because I mean, most people that are obese are not obese because, well, let's say morbidly obese, right? Like obviously some people have health conditions that make them overweight, and like judging somebody for being like, for not being like, you know, fucking having abs is stupid, right? But like when we're talking about morbid obesity, it's very rare that it's purely a health condition that has brought you to that point. Even a thyroid condition is manageable to some degree.
Right. And that's what I think is driving this type of, you know, pretty much plus size models, or pretty much being more accepting of various body sizes being as public figures. Because, you know, I think we've tried the shaming approach.
Right. Well, I mean, what I was going to say is that it's usually an eating disorder. And like most of the research shows that like shame almost never does anything except exacerbate the eating disorder.
Yeah. And,
like I think shame can work for things, right? But when you're talking about an eating disorder, it has the exact opposite effect.
So yeah, shame is tricky. And in general, it's not overly useful as far as I can tell. I'm going to provide something in the chat in terms of, you know, in terms of evidence of like trying to end pretty much fat stigmatization, because we pretty much have concluded pretty reasonably that stigmatization, not a good thing. But like there is a role for shame, but it does not seem to be its role, or doesn't seem to have a role in like getting people motivated to like be better, at least health-wise, or like it seemed like shame has a very niche use. I think shame
works for certain things, right? Like you know, tobacco cessation, for example. I think shame has been shown to be effective.
That I can't say with any confidence. From the, let's say, beneficial effects of shame that I have seen, sort of comes from like in a social context of like someone recognizes that they have done something really socially bad and misstepped.
I think that's like, I think that's true with anything. Like shame can even work, I think, in terms of like even in terms of eating disorders, right? But it really, I think it comes down to like, what do we mean by shame, right? So if we're talking about like, you know, large public figures or people like myself memeing on fat people over and over again, yeah, if a morbidly obese person saw me, they would probably didn't help them, right? Or, you know, like, you know, things like that, like political ad campaigns and things like that. I don't think those do any effect. But like if your mom, for example, is like coming from a loving place and is like, hey, you know, this isn't good, right? Like, I think if they can feel that love that's combined with that shame, I think that can come from a place that helps.
1,000%. If it's pretty much, well, I wouldn't define it as shame at that point.
Right.
I put it more in the realm of like, you know, some guilt and compassion, and hopefully largely driven by compassion. And that like,
that's true.
It should come from hopefully someone that cares about you, because I think that primary messaging is important of like, you have confidence that this person is coming from a place of caring, as opposed to like a stranger on the internet. I think it's pretty much less clear that they're coming from a place of caring about you.
I mean, like, I definitely take issue with like fat acceptance as a cultural phenomenon, because I think it comes with a lot of like dangerous things. But like, I will always shit on somebody that does these like cringe videos of like making fun of a fat person at the gym or something like that. Like, you know, like I can't imagine a more damaging and unhelpful thing than like seeing someone that's trying to do better and trying to take at least some steps, even if they're failing. You know, like they're putting in that effort, and then like people make fun of them, and I'm like, yeah, that's literally like just a piece of shit right there.
Yeah, and that's something that that really, you know, enrages me. Of like someone who's, as you said, trying to better themselves, and they're just being torn down. Like, I don't blame anybody. Like, the gym, as an avid gym goer for like decades, like it can be an intimidating place for lots of people, and it takes courage to like step in there if you're brand new, and if like some of your first experiences is like, you know, people talking shit about you, like I can totally see that's going to lead to a bad place, and I don't see why. I think that's
I mean, you want to stop fucking like you want to make people healthier, and you're at the gym and you're an avid gym goer, especially if you're a lifter, right? And the reason I say especially if you're a lifter is that like it can be difficult and expensive for people that don't have social networks of other people that lift at the gym to know how to properly lift without injuring themselves.
100%.
And like if you want to stop people from being fat, if you're a person that lifts, just go find someone with poor form and as nicely as you can offer to help them.
Yeah,
that's how you stop that shit.
And you know, the vast majority of like, you know, gym goers that I know, like, well, maybe not vast, but the majority, like, they are supporting. Like, every once in a while.
But you live in Canada, okay? That it's very different. Okay, people are just nice in Canada, right? Like, this is not like, don't go to LA Fitness and try that shit, boys. It's not gonna work for you. They're gonna make fun of you.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Totally. I assume I'm probably living in a slightly more politer society. But even that, like, yeah, and well, almost to my point of like, if I see sort of some negatives in my environment, and I can be reasonably confident that it's, you know, even worse somewhere else, let's say, you know, across the border, then it's like, yeah, I don't necessarily blame any. I'd say it's overly simplistic advice to just say, you know, just go to the gym. That's a huge task for some people, and as someone who has coached, you know, clients, like, it's really hard to like overcome that hurdle for some people. Not a problem.
I mean, I would say if you're morbidly obese, just walk outside. That's what I would say. Fuck the gym, right? If you're morbidly obese, you're not ready for the gym. Like, let's be honest, it's a workout just to get to the gym and get back, and you're probably going to injure yourself, and you probably don't know what you're doing unless you've got the money for a personal trainer that can like help you like with like a goal and stuff. But if you don't have a personal trainer, like just start taking walks outside. Bring a water bottle, you know, maybe even if you're really fat, you know, like something like a Pedialyte with low sugar or something, you know, but like drink plenty of fluids and just walk and get some sun and breathe some fresh air and move your body.
And I think that is what is one of the things that's driving this fat acceptance, is like, you know, I think we're old enough to, you know, look back, let's say the 90s, and, you know, the ultra rail thin heroin chic, like that's the ideal.
And the long butt. What was about that, boys? Do you remember the long butt?
Yes, I remember.
Like every model, every advertisement, it was these skinny girls with no butt. What the fuck were we thinking in the 90s?
I mean, never appealed to me, but it was a huge thing, right? Like, and I think that's, you know, I think we're going from like, this is a course correction. Maybe it's too much of a course correction, but I trust that we'll find some sort of a balance of like, yes, like maybe we should totally accept like all body shapes and sizes, but also at the same time, let's not pretend, obviously, that this is like healthy or like the optimal way for health. But I think accepting and having the confidence, like, it's from there that you drive the changes, not from like you're an awful person, just put down whatever food that you're eating.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring you on today. I wanted to troll you a little bit with the fat thing, and then just kind of have something we could talk about and
you
agree
can
on
always,
for a little bit.
and that's the thing. Also, to bring it back to like shame, like that's where it's like tricky. Like you can try and shame me all you want, like it's not gonna work. And that's where it's like I can recognize that, you know, shame can be like innocuous, but you don't know the other party that you're talking to. Like you can try and shame me to get me to do something. It's not like I just don't respond to that. But some people understandably do because they don't have the same level of, you know, self-worth or self-love.
I don't know. I think acceptance can go too far.
I'm open to that. I see no reason why, as of now, that acceptance has gone too far. But I
mean, like when you know, like when airline companies charge you for a double seat and it's considered a form of oppression, right? Like, and like people are like actively saying that that's oppression. It's like, no, you're just objectively too large to like be able to sit in the seat like that. Like when you start denying reality, that's when acceptance goes too far. Like I can say that, like saying like, hey, you shouldn't walk up to someone and be like, what the fuck are you doing eating a salad, you fat fuck? You know you want the fried chicken at a restaurant. Like, obviously that's wrong, right? But like when people start telling you that you have mental issues because you don't want to date someone that's morbidly obese, right? Or when reality starts getting moved out of the, or when doctors get like in trouble or canceled because they simply state medical facts, right? And that's what I mean by acceptance going too far. Like, I don't think we can ever go too far in like just recognizing that a person is a human being and like not intentionally being a dickhead to them. But like, if we start denying reality, then that's like when I think serious issues occur.
Yeah, but I don't, like, again, I can't say with any certainty, but I don't think the majority of people who are overweight or obese are, like, I think they're aware that it's healthy. They just don't want the stigmatization. They don't want like the added baggage of like, yes, I recognize I'm unhealthy, and I think the vast majority like don't necessarily want to be in that state, but to change that state is not so easy. And I'd also pose the question, the hypothetical, you using the example of like, yeah, if someone doesn't fit in one seat, and you know, should just pay for 2 seats. What if, so someone with a smaller frame, if I did fit in half a seat, should I be able to pay for half a seat?
I mean, if a half seat exists and they're cheaper, sure. I mean, when I fly, I always have to pay additional money, not because I'm so fat that I take up 2 seats, but because I'm 6'5". And so I always pay for the seat by the emergency room if I can, or the emergency exit.
Yeah. But also I would say, you know, if this is, maybe this would bolster your argument of it not being a free market, but like, shouldn't the market adjust of like the population? In terms of,
I think we're seeing that. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, the biggest thing that people I think get mad about with fat acceptance is modeling, right? Because modeling is intended in some way to be, you know, kind of like an aspirational goal, I think, which is not how modeling and advertisement really works. That's how society has kind of taken it in. And it's always been damaging to women and health. And to men as well, but no one wants to admit that because fuck men's feelings. But like, obviously men's fitness and stuff has been like insane bulimic dudes. You know what I mean? Like,
no, like
taking steroids.
Right. And I think we're seeing those effects now in terms of like, yeah, largely marketing and unrealistic expectations or body image expectations largely imposed on women, but it's happening to men. And we're seeing, as you sort of brought up and alluded to, like steroid use, as far as I can tell, among men, like is increasing because they appear to be deeply insecure about their bodies when they're comparing to like what you see in social media or whatever. And even
I think some of that, I think some of that is probably the successful destigmatization, appropriate or not, of like products like SARMs, right? I think the injection of like low dose steroids and like that becoming popular is also like the marketing of a lot of people to sell you on the idea that like low dose steroids are somehow not bad for you in the way that traditional steroid supplements are, even though it's really just a dosage thing, I think has contributed to the increase in steroid use as well, though.
Yeah, totally. I have no doubt that that's a variable in terms of like we just have now a much greater variety of performance enhancing drugs, and not just straight like testosterone injected into you. And like, yeah, SARMs appears to have been a little bit of a game changer in terms of like it's made it more accessible and potentially maybe slightly less dangerous, but still, like they appear to be attractive to like teenage boys for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think it's a search like
Right,
for
but
self-esteem and confidence.
yeah, but what I mean to say is that like we have like we as a society idolize these kind of, David-like figures in advertising. But they've almost always been unhealthy figures, right? I think the only people that have ever really been healthy was, 2000 Sports Illustrated are probably the only healthy bodies we've ever seen. Like they've always been super skinny or fucked up in some way. And I think because we've internalized it as a society as being like what we're supposed to aspire to, many people I think are offended by the change in marketing to the recognition that women have 80% of all purchasing power in the market, right? Men don't spend money, they spend money on women for women, and then women spend money for themselves, right? And so because of this, the market has responded to the fact that a third of women, or nearly 40% of women in America, are obese. And like, why wouldn't you market towards 40% of the fucking market, right? Like it would just be dumb for a company that's capitalist to not put larger plus size models in their clothing for those women and try and sell that as sexy so that those women can feel sexy buying those products.
Yeah, I pretty much agree 100% with everything that you just outlined. I would just sort of add in terms of like, body image when it comes to men, like, yeah, totally. What's been marketed pretty much has always been largely unhealthy, but I think you're, at least to my eyes, I think it's going to like a huge extreme. I mean, just comparing like, back in the day, whatever, 70s, 80s, like something like the Mr. Olympia and bodybuilding
like,
competition.
or like Iggy.
Yeah.
Like Ziggy, Ziggy.
Yeah, but I don't know who you're referring to. But those are pretty like those were like less mainstream, popular, but like and now like bodybuilding and like Mr. Olympia, like that's way more like, especially with the rise of social media, like it appears to have just like taken off. Where it's like, yeah, bodybuilders, either competitive or just like social media influencers are just like super popular. And like you just compare like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Olympia, to like today's Mr. Olympia, and it's just like wild.
Right. Yeah. Like it's obvious they're using steroids and they're like, I'm clean, I'm natty. It's like, no, you're fucking not. Like,
yeah, exactly. And
that's not chicken breasts. Okay, dude, like get the fuck out of here.
Exactly. And this messaging that is totally, I think, is trickling down to teenage boys, where it's like, yeah, if this is like peak masculinity, well, you better start your whatever testosterone regimen like as soon as possible.
Do you think that it has something to do, because I do, obviously, but I mean, I don't want to assume that you do or don't. Do you think that a lot of it too is just a reaction to the lives that young boys live now as feminism is on the rise and dating apps and things like that, like that so many young boys feel completely abandoned, that there's this market for a kind of masculinity that in some ways is good and in some ways is bad, just as a reaction to, the fact that these boys can't get dates anymore, or that they can't, that they can't exist in our society without being told that they're like bad people for the virtue of being cis men. And, like they're the suicide rates are going up, and, the college success rates are going down, et cetera, et cetera.
So I would say that's totally an element at play. I would just add in, or rather, I see it as a root issue of like boys or young men. They are searching for like pretty much like self-esteem or self-worth, and they used to be able to get it or like get some sort of validation in the dating market. And that's, I think it's fair to say that it's a much greater challenge for young men in the dating market. And so like if they can't get the validation or like their self-worth from there, then it's like, well, if getting a partner or like whatever women is the ultimate end goal, then like bodybuilding is also like, I think, a natural conclusion, or just like because it's like one of the most accessible of like, well, if I just get the six-pack abs, then just women will just start flocking to me.
Right. I mean, but they're kind of not wrong. And that's part of the problem too, is that like, you know what I mean? Like if you go from being a chonky boy to having a six pack, like your chances in the dating market skyrocket.
For sure. Like obviously that's an improvement. But I think you are seeing like even like that's clearly not enough. It's not like every single gym goer that gets the six-pack abs like automatically like their life just dramatically makes a turnaround, and like all of their issues are solved as long as they like get in shape. Because I think and also it's super interesting to me. Okay, what if, because I think an argument can be made today, if not maybe 5 years from now, the best dating advice that you can receive if you're a young guy is to go to college and get a degree. Especially as
I disagree. I think that's the worst dating advice. Here's my dating advice for you. Here's my young man advice. Okay, get in shape. You don't have to be like super gym swole. Just don't be unhealthy. Be healthy. Stop dating. Stop spending money and wasting money. Go to tech school. Get a job that gives you a decent career. And yeah, if you have a dream of being an engineer or a PhD biochemist or something like that, sure, go get your undergrad. But if you're going to undergrad to like discover yourself and get a college degree to make yourself better, that's a terrible idea. You're just going to end up with student loan debt.
Well,
right?
in the United States.
Yeah.
So, and I
right,
I say
but
that,
hear me out. And then and then get a house, buy a house. And when you are a homeowner and you have decent money and you're not in debt and you're in decent shape, then take your ass to church and go find you a girl that's somewhere between the ages of 20 to 25 that isn't super hot, but isn't for the streets and is a good girl, and start a family, and you will be happier than you ever could be trying to chase super hot girls on Tinder.
Well, so I understand why you're saying that. I certainly have some mixed feelings about it. One of the reasons why I said that, some of the best dating advice would be like get a university or college degree is largely driven by like not only necessarily earning power, but just in terms of like, if you look at what women, the partners they tend to choose, like generally speaking, they tend to choose a partner that's, at least as equally as educated as them. And I think we're seeing some of the ramifications. Like,
I don't think that's true. What I think is true is that they tend to date hypergamously, right? So older, 6 years, right? They tend to look for partners that are intelligent and wise to some degree, or at least more so than them. And I think they look for financially stable men or men that earn more money than them. And I think there's a strong correlation between that and a college degree. But I think as society continues, that's not necessarily the best path towards those things.
Yeah. So I would ask you the question of like, here's if you are bringing in sort of like, yeah, like on average, sure, women tend to be attracted to a person with a higher income or a man with a higher income. And I think that, a college education like dramatically increases your earning power, right? And so like, how do you reconcile that discrepancy of like, well, if women, as they get more and more educated, and we're seeing some like emerging data that they are starting to out-earn men. Okay.
If they don't have children, they out-earn men. That's basically the data so far.
Yeah,
once they have kids and they have like what is it called? The mommy, whatever, like that severely, because they spend less time at work. They're not like men. They don't want to sacrifice 80 hours a week to work in a law firm when they have kids, right? Like they would rather work 40 hours, and that's perfectly fine. But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, and so like if that trend continues and like that discrepancy like widens, because do you think like the majority of young men, the way they are socialized, like they would be okay, dating women that are like out earning them, or like do you
I don't think it leads to a successful relationship, and under most circumstances it can work, but I think it's playing with fire.
Yeah, so why do you think it would not be successful?
because my audience and where I live is mostly American, and so yes, it increases earning potential, but it also gives you a lot of debt, right? And what I suggested was to not to just go into the labor market, but to go to a tech school. Like, I think getting like a technical degree that can teach you jobs that easily earn 60, 80, and sometimes even $100,000 while not saddling yourself with like $40,000 in student loan debt is a better earning potential for young men right now than just going to college just to go to college. If you're going to college with the goal of like a master's degree or PhD and a goal that you have, or you want to go in, let's say, petroleum engineering, or like you have a very specific thing you want to do, yeah, do that, right? Because that's going to be better for you if you're driven towards that. But if you're just going to get an undergraduate degree in like psychology or sociology because you heard that a college degree is the best way to do it, I don't think it's as effective as much less debt and more time and you know, an additional 2 years in the market than like, let's say, going and getting welding certifications or you know, things like that can earn you just as much, if not more money than that other path without having as much student loan debt.
Yeah, and given, you know, your social context of like, yeah, in the United States, yeah, very often you have to go into debt to just achieve a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, like if you go in the military, right, and you have the GI Bill, right, and go get a college degree, go get your 4-year degree, right, because you're not going to have student loan debt. But if you're going to take a bunch of loans out to go to school, then, you know what I mean? Like, I don't see the utility in that unless you have a specific goal in mind.
Right, but so, and if your focus is on technical school or the trades, like, I would ask the question. I don't know if I know the answer to this, but do you think, let's say, if now, in whatever 5-10 years, like the overwhelming majority of women have like either a bachelor's or master's, I think it's hard. I think you can make the argument that the master's is now the new bachelor's. Do you think that like in that dating landscape, like the majority of women would be okay dating someone who earns less and is less
I don't think you'll
educated?
earn less. See, here's because I'm also talking about hypergamy, right? So like what I'm like in the totality of the situation that I'm presenting, right? What I'm talking about is going to tech school at 18, graduating easily by 20, getting a job that in a few years you'll be making $60,000, $70,000 a year, right? And then stop wasting money on bullshit and on girls and on dating and in trying to and partying, and instead invest that money in being a homeowner. Because like, I don't think that women actually look for a monetary value. I don't think that women actually look for someone that makes more money than them. What I think they're actually looking for is financial stability. I think they're looking for financial stability and someone that's responsible with their money and someone that they can like go on vacations with occasionally and can do fun things with and will pay for those things. And so what I think, if you focus more on a realistic path that makes you a homeowner, that makes you financially stable without any debt and allows you to have a decent amount of income, I think you've kind of hit 80-90% of what women are actually looking for in money. Whereas like that last 10 to 20% is just women that are just looking to like, you know, be on yachts and you know what I mean? Like they just want to party and right. You don't want to settle down with that anyways.
So then I would ask the question of like, so then why do you think that, you know, pretty much across the board, or at least young men are struggling in the dating landscape currently?
Ooh, I think some of it was an inevitability of women's rights, right? You know, the birth control pill, things like that, right? Sex positive feminism obviously has an effect, right? Because, you know, and I think this is both was probably damaging to both men and women, right? We know, for example, that like a virgin does really well in a marriage, both in happiness and in likely success of the marriage, right? Followed by someone that only had one previous sexual partner. Interestingly enough, one of the worst things is 2 sexual partners, because it seems that the female recognizes that there's like other options and other sexual partners, and maybe they haven't like explored enough to like have a happy
they've moved
marriage.
on from like they literally don't know any better.
Right. And then 3 to 5 is a decent place, 6 to 9, right? But if you have more than 10 sexual partners, right, just boys, just don't marry a woman that's got a body count over 10. It's just not a recipe for success. I mean, there are exceptions to every rule, obviously, but marriages are very unhappy.
What if they don't disclose? Because at least I've
I mean, of course.
Inquired. I've never shown up on a first date or whatever saying here's.
And by the way, I'm right. No, I'm talking about CDC data, right? It's actually like
that.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, how does that work in like the real life? Like,
these are the way it works. The way I interpret the data, and I could be wrong. The way that I interpret the data is this, right? Women that are highly religious tend to have successful marriages because there's a strong amount of social capital. There's a lot of networking. They're not isolated in the marriage. They have a lot of friends. They have a lot of like people that they can fall back on. And I don't know that virginity is necessarily like the big key factor here as much as being highly religious, because the two are strongly correlated, right? And so I think that's probably the success of virginity and like only one previous sexual partner. The two I already explained. The 3 to 9, I think, comes from a certain mindset where the body count, if you will, lays in that regard, which is women that have sex with people that they're dating seriously, and not the type of person that just kind of randomly has one night stands or just kind of has sex with whomever. And I think you should be looking for that type of person, the person that isn't just promiscuous and out there like for the body count, because that person has a certain personality that doesn't tend towards itself towards a happy family and marriage. And then it's not the actual number that I think that is the important detail here.
Right, it's the underlying whatever, as you sort of said, what a personality type that's driving that behavior. Whatever underlying whatever personality trait or confluence of traits might not.
Right, but if a girl tells you she's had sex with like 40 dudes before, like you should probably you should recognize that as a red flag.
What if it was like 20 years ago?
Like I said, there's always outliers, right? Like it's a red flag. A red flag doesn't mean immediately run no matter what. It means
I'm just clarifying.
I should investigate this and figure out what's going on. If you meet some girl, right, that's like 28, that's like, I was abused, I was a drug addict, I found Jesus, and like they're just this amazing person, still a red flag, right? It's still like, I don't know, right? But like if they're into you and you're into them and everything seems to connect and everything's good, then whatever.
Yeah, and I haven't like looked into this data like super heavily, but like the data, I think even looked briefly at what you posted on Twitter about the CDC, and it's like, it just seems like, quote unquote, successful marriages, like ones that just basically don't divorce, right? I don't think we have like good data in terms of like what, like, are these people that are staying married?
I was posting, if you looked at the CDC data and not just the article, because I just like grabbed the article real quick to throw it out, and you were like, fuck this source. And I was just like, yeah, but it's all CDC data. Like it's not the source that's important. I was just throwing the data.
No, like,
but if you look at the
CDC with commentary. Yeah.
They also did general life satisfaction surveys as part of that as well, right? So it's not just the happiness metric wasn't just defined as whether or not they divorced. The other problem is serial monogamists. Have you heard about this phenomenon?
Oh yeah, of course, going from one relationship to the next. Yeah.
Right, but like marrying over and over again. Like people that are like religious serial monogamists will like say, "Oh, I can't have sex with someone unless I'm married," right? But then they'll be on their 6th marriage.
I think that's probably, I think less common I've never heard of that in my area. I think
it's a really common thing in America, especially in the Bible Belt.
Yeah, that
where
makes
the
sense.
social pressure for marriage and like not having sex until you're married is there, but like they date and they want to have sex, so they do, but they get married first, and it like fucks with the divorce statistics.
I couldn't say how much. That does seem a little bit weird to me, but
it's pretty common in the Bible Belt and like the deep South in America.
Yeah, the religious America always is just really mind-boggling to me. And like, yeah, totally religion and that sense of community, like, and I don't know how to take into account these factors of like the social and religious pressure to like find a partner and like marry, settle down, and like pump out children as quickly as possible. Like, I don't know if that's what we would consider like successful marriage, because like how much is it a choice like at that point?
I mean, if you're happy and you have a bunch of kids, it feels pretty fucking successful to me. But if you take out the happiness metric and you're only looking at divorce rate and birth rate, I would say that, you know, there's a strong correlation between happiness and birth rate. There's a strong correlation between general life satisfaction and general satisfaction with life survey. So GSLS, which is basically like currently the best metric we have, right? I mean, it's self-report. Do with that what you will. But between that and like having children and having more children, and it seems to be that happy marriages tend to produce more children. So it's a correlation, right? It's not, there's no causation there that I can prove or anything. But like I would say, if your marriage lasts a long time and you have a bunch of kids, the statistical likelihood that you're pretty satisfied with your life is much higher.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. And haven't again looked deeply into the data, so I'll take your word for it. And I can totally see that. Like, I'm not gonna lie. From the limited data that I've seen, the people that come from a religious background that sort of like settle down, they seem to be like pretty decently content with their outcomes. And so, like, yeah.
Have you ever read this? Have you ever read a book called Bowling Alone?
I have not. No.
Okay, Bowling Alone is like a landmark sociological book from the 90s. You really, really should read it if you like. It's a great book. It's a pretty centrist sociology look at like what changed. You can get it on Kindle, pretty cheap, I think, if you have like Kindle. Like, I listen to a lot of audiobooks via Kindle, but like you can get it pretty easily, right? Basically, the argument that he makes, I can't remember the guy's name right now. But basically, yes, Robert Putnam, yes. The argument that he makes is about social capital. That whole book is about social capital and like why happiness and like stress and issues have all occurred from like the greatest generation into the boomers into Gen X, right? And he only lightly touches on millennials because they're like little baby kids at the time, right? But it makes a really good argument about like how, we used to live and work in small communities, and like then all of a sudden we like drove into the city with like the suburbs, and how like we don't even shop in the same place that we live, so we drive somewhere else to shop and we work somewhere else. And so like that sense of community is that like we don't know our neighbors, we don't know people, we're in a lot less social clubs. And he makes a pretty strong argument that one of the major reasons why religious people are happier and healthier and give more to charity is because they're a part of their community in a way that people that are non-religious are like very disconnected from their community.
I overall agree with that assessment. And to your point, people like, I don't know my neighbor in my apartment complex. I've lived here for 4 years.
My neighbors got evicted, boys. Everyone in my apartment building is getting evicted because the housing increases, and they just keep like playing fuck games to try and kick people out of the house so they can raise the rent.
Yeah, and that's where it's like, we as whatever the godless left have to reconcile that, or like come to terms with that. Like, how do we solve that? I don't think religion is necessarily the answer. Like, I think you could have a sense of community in the absence of religion.
The problem is how do you get, like, that's all well and good. The problem is that what's the incentive for that strong sense of community? Whereas religion has an extremely strong incentive, right? Go to church. Whereas like you can build a community center, but like how much of the atheist neighborhood is actually going to go to the speeches and the community center and the events, right? Like there's just not the same incentive structure, I think.
I think the incentive is built in. I think people want to connect with other people. Like, I think so here's where it's going to get super, at least probably maybe super complicated, of like, despite all the increasing rates of mental health issues, increasing whatever anxiety, social anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and like on the surface, many people's natural tendency to socially isolate. But I think underlying that, like there is a deep-seated need to connect with other people. I think we've just lost the ability, as in we don't know how to connect in a healthy way anymore.
Maybe.
And I think,
maybe I haven't seen data to support that conclusion that like, that we can like solve, like, how we can spark that supposed deep human drive. I would agree with you, but again, I think people need a kick in the butt to go and do that with all the other incentives to stay home, like internet and social media and, you know, a busy life and all these other things. And so, like, I don't know the pathway forward. I don't know the right answer there.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how familiar you are with, let's say, for example, so me as a biologist, maybe a poor biologist or a bad biologist, I don't know, but, you know, if there's like one thing that I'm highly confident that we are biologically wired for, like this is the only thing that I will like sort of stake my claim on, is that like we as humans, we pretty like wired to connect with other people. And I think there's like this snowball effect of like, I operate under the assumption that, you know, we want to connect with people, but through a confluence of factors, we have this increasing anxiety and depression that like makes it harder to connect. And then it just like, we just like slowly and slowly further like disconnect from each other. Where it's like, again, we like lost our way. Like we all want the same thing, but we just like don't know how to get there. Like we're like ships passing in the night, but we want to get to the same destination. And it's like, I'm not sure how familiar you are with like attachment theory, but there's a process called
I don't believe in attachment theory, but I'm well educated on it.
I'm curious.
Both in my undergrad and grad school. Like I don't find the data supports attachment theory as well as other psychological theories of development and personality.
So you
it comes off a little bit pop psychology to me.
But you seem to be like an advocate, or at least, you know, you recognize that the big five are like an actual thing that is like verified.
Yeah, right? for sure.
Yeah. So, well, attachment theory has like way more empirical evidence like behind it. Like it's called attachment theory. Like it's a scientific theory.
Yeah, no, I disagree. I disagree with it a lot. I mean, I don't really want to get into it. But like, go ahead. Okay. I mean, like, I find, well, I mean, the reason I like the big five is we arrived at it axiomatically, which is not something we've done with any other form of social, like classification systems and development of personality. Right.
Well, yeah, at one point, sure. And yes, you can talk about sort of the early experiments, but like we now have like, you know, neuroscientific like data showing that like we appear to have like attachment system that can be sort of like dysregulated or like can misfire. Right.
But like, okay, when you say attachment theory, right, that also includes attachment styles, and I think a lot of that stuff is weak.
Okay, I mean that's fair enough. But just as like
I'm talking in terms of neuroscience, like you're absolutely correct. But the classification systems that we use to describe those, I think there's a lot of different like interpretations out there, and a lot of them get like really popularized in a way that like isn't what we actually know. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I totally take your point. That like, especially when it comes to like the pop psychology realm, like, you know, attachment theory has like taken off sort of in the pop psychology domain. And like, yeah, it has totally sort of taken off in the past few years, especially with social media or on social media. But, you know, if you accept the big five, there's some pretty strong evidence like showing like, you know, even though we sort of view the big five as like, well, these are just the personality traits, like they are what they are. But I think, you know, you would even agree that there are some personality traits that are like better or more optimal than others. As in like probably across the board, if someone is low in conscientiousness, like you probably would want to be high in conscientiousness. Like I think everyone.
I think the big problem with the big five domain is that we haven't adequately categorized and discovered the subtraits. And I think that's where we get confounding variables that make the big five seem like they're not as empirically sourced as other things. Because like, for example, there's a 10 trait sub theory of the big five where like conscientiousness would be broken down into industriousness and what's the other one? Industriousness and I don't know, but conscientiousness is like two subtraits, and you know what I mean? So like, I think the problem is we haven't adequately discovered what the appropriate subtraits are within the big five, not the actual problem with the big five.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. But I still think you would agree that even if like conscientiousness is like divided up into whatever 2 or 3 other dimensions, like at the end of the day,
orderliness, that's what it is. So like orderliness is the one that's really predictive of, let's say, conservative opinion, or like it's fairly predictive of disgust mechanism, right? Whereas like industriousness is kind of the one that we think of as like, you know, the worker bee that like likes hierarchical structures. And often these two correlate strongly, but some people can have really high orderliness and really low industriousness, or vice versa. And then when you have those people and you put them in a big five, all of a sudden conscientiousness lose some of its predictive capacity.
Yeah, but I think, like, again, as far as the data that I've seen, like conscientiousness appears to be like one of the stronger predictors of like academic success, better health outcomes, etc., etc. And so it's like, yeah, if there's like one thing that you know, if you know that you're low in conscientiousness, like you probably want to like find ways to increase it.
Yeah, and it's also one of the most movable personality traits. Conscientiousness goes up as you age.
Yeah, but I don't know by how much, I can't remember. But you know, ideally you'd want like from the get-go, like from day one, to be like high in conscientiousness. And again, if there's any like personality trait that you would probably agree that you'd want to like minimize, it's probably like neuroticism, as in like there doesn't, as far as I could tell, like I don't see any value in either being medium or high neuroticism, and that like if there's an opportunity to like pretty much minimize your neuroticism, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, but I think, yeah, it doesn't seem to be good, right? At the same time, you know, any lack of them is probably bad too, right? Like I think neuroticism, negative emotion, especially when we're talking about, let's say, anxiety, right? Anxiety can be a driving force for us to achieve things. And it can also be a healthy level of anxiety might, let's say, be appropriate if, let's say, you live in Soviet Russia, right? Like you don't want to be someone that has no anxiety and is just like really, let's say, extroverted and it's just like, yeah, fuck the government, right? Like you want a little anxiety. It's like, hey man, you probably shouldn't say that. You might get killed, right? So I think it's hard to determine, because what we're also looking at is in terms of like the effectiveness of personality domains, right? We're looking at it in our current structure in a liberal democracy as it stands right now. Yeah, our current social context. And so it might be that some of those things are actually really good for us. They're just not good for us in our current social context.
Yeah, as in like those personality traits may be adaptive, but given our current circumstances,
right? During current circumstances, they're maladaptive. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I take your point. But yeah. So, and at least based off of a lot of the research or like what I hear about the big five, is like, you know, people just kind of like assume that these are just like, you know, your personality traits are just like what you inherit, or like, you know, what you're born with, that's your personality. And like, you know, there might be some changes as you like age and gain experience. But it seems like most people like come from the space that, you know, your personality is just like, it's in your genes, or like largely driven by your genes.
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell because we know that ACE triggers can dramatically affect personality, right? It's also hard to tell because a lot of what we assume to be from the genes, we can't really test in an ethical thing, because is it parents passing on their values or is it parents passing on their genes? And like the only way to really empirically test it in like a sound way would be separate children from their parents, like separate twins. And you mean like you can do some twin studies and things like that.
He's a radical leftist. It's not an advocate.
Right. And even the twin studies, the problem with the twin studies is that they usually get put in similar circumstances, right? You don't separate twins and then put one in like an impoverished area, because we don't usually let impoverished people adopt children, right? It's expensive to adopt a child to begin with, and two, you don't usually get through the adoption process unless you're at least middle class, right? So it's it's difficult for us to know how much of that is genetic and how much of that is passing on values from the parents, or just, you know, similar opportunities, you know, right? Like 2 high IQ parents are going to make good money, and so the likelihood that that kid ends up in private school or in a good education or in a neighborhood that has really good schools is far likelier than, let's say, 2 low IQ parents or a single mom in a bad neighborhood, right?
Yeah, 100%. And like, well, again, it's totally difficult to tease out, but I think like the common mantra is like these are personality traits, and so like they're not the most changeable things. And there's some
so for openness too. Psilocybin and openness is pretty crazy too.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's where, like, you know, that's where it seems like you're altering your biology or like your neurochemistry or your biochemistry.
Maybe, yeah.
But there's some interesting research, at least interesting to me, of like the intersection between attachment theory and the Big Five. So there was a study took place over the course of like 30 years, and maybe this will, I don't know, give confidence that these categories of attachment styles are a thing, because they're secure one. And like, so that they took a group of children or a group of, you know, people, and started in childhood, and like they assessed their attachment style in childhood, twice in childhood. I think it was like 6 months and then 12 months again. And they, you know, tried, and they saw that they correlated. And then like 30 years later, they assessed their attachment style again, but also their personality traits. And it, at least to me, super interesting. Like the secure attachment style was like pretty strongly associated with high conscientiousness, low neuroticism, greater openness. I
mean, like anxious avoidant is obviously going to correlate with neuroticism. Like, how could they not?
Exactly. And that's why, like, I view sort of here is where it's like, since I tend to look through this lens, and like, I think that we are largely raising people, sort of not anything pathological, but like we just have more and more people with sort of some, you know, low level insecure attachment style, and so like we have lost the ability to connect, and then as a result of that, like it has snowballed out of control, and we're just like, there's just like, since nobody can connect, there's like increasing rates of like anxiety and depression, and no surprise if you have increasing rates of anxiety and depression, these aren't the best people that like know how to connect with other people.
I wonder if that has something to do with the birth rates too, though. Right? Because, you know, we know that, like, from both the personality domain as well as attachment theory, that like you're far better off in a home with 2 or 3 children than you are as an only child. Even though only child has high predictors of success, that goes away once you and diminishes negatively once you once you account for socioeconomic status, because it's older, wealthier people tend to have less children, right? And so, you know, we go like, oh, only child, you know, an only child is the most successful, you know, the most financially successful and like mentally healthy. Like, obviously there's something good about being an only child, but actually it's not. It's just, there's something good about having older, more prepared parents and growing up, you know, with more money, right? And having high IQ parents, right? Having high IQ parents with values that led to their success, and, you know, and having more opportunities is somehow magically better. Who would have thought, right? But I wonder if maybe some of those issues stem from the fact that there's a lack of socialization with children, because so many of them are only children and so many of them don't have fathers.
I can see that as a potential variable, and totally, like, the low birth rate issue is an issue, at least, well, in the Western world, and that's where it's like, that's where, to me, it's some of the most curious, in terms of, like, you know, a lot of people rely on biology, especially when it comes to explaining behavior. Okay, and so how do you understand the declining birth rate?
How do I understand? Well, I think, oh God, I think first and foremost, liberation of women, right, has led to women waiting longer to have children. And we have a lack of appropriate, we are no longer attached to reality in the way that our culture discusses fertility. our culture has lied to a lot of women and men, right? Like it's not just a women's issue, even though it is women's bodies, right? But I mean, men are, you obviously need that for a family, right? I mean, a biological, yeah.
As of today, it might not always be the case for the next 20, 30 years.
I mean, sure, but I mean, like, I'm talking about a traditional family of a mother and a father, right? In order for that to occur, right? Like, you need a male, right? But what I think has occurred is that we have lied to our society about the ability to have children and be happy with a family and children, because the nature of reality is that biologically women should be looking to settle down around 24. As a woman, like if you want to have more than like 2 kids and you want to have like a happy marriage and a family, like you need to be seriously dating and looking for a husband at 24. If you're waiting until you're 30 to look for a serious husband and you're not finding him until you're 32, 33, 34, and then you want to start popping out kids, your fertility's already kind of gone, a large portion of it, by the time you hit 35. And unless you want to have Irish twins and you want to be pregnant like instantly the moment you have a kid, back to back to back, like if you want 3 kids, your first pregnancy better be at 32 minimum with Irish twins, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like the reality of the situation is that like if you're over 30 and you're not like settled and ready to have children, you're not going to have a big family. Like it's just not going to happen. Yeah, some wealthy
probably
people,
not, like 9 children, probably not. But
right. You might have 2 is not even population replacement.
Is it 2.2 or 2.5? That's I can't remember.
In America, it's 2.06.
Okay.
Right. That's America. In other countries, it's higher because you have to look at like the death rate, right? And then it will always be a minimum of 2.05 because of the tendency for more females to be born than males. Especially as you get older, men are more likely to have daughters as they get older. But when you calculate that percentage, it's 2.06 in America, and in most of like Western countries that have like most first world countries, it's 2.06 or close to it.
That makes sense.
So somebody has to have 3 kids, right? In order for you to have 2, you're not doing your part. I've got 2. I'm not doing my part. I'm close. I'm 0.06 children away.
Yeah, pump out that toe.
I make this joke sometimes where I say, is there a hot trans girl that can give me 0.06 of a child? It's funny to my community. It doesn't go over well with the trans community, but I don't give a fuck. It's hilarious.
So it seems like you recognize that this is largely like this declining birth rate, largely driven by like the social context or like the external environment.
I think there are economic reasons, right? Like I think
yeah,
the
that's
fact
why I'm including that.
I think government and public education, which I'm a big advocate of abolishing. Obviously, you're not going to agree there, but like I think that what we have done is we have forced both parents into the labor market. Like the economic conditions, and I think I would blame the state. I would blame the state. You might blame other factors, right? But one way or the other, we're in a situation where both men and women feel it's necessary to work, and I think when both parents feel that they need to work, the ability to have children drastically goes down.
Yeah, and I think we're on the same page in terms of like pretty much the extreme pressure to like work just to make ends meet, not the most conducive to the economic conditions to like start a family, or even just like the time commitment, right?
Also, we got to talk about microplastics too, right? Like there are other environmental factors of of pollution that are drastically reducing male fertility as well.
Male fertility, absolutely, 1,000% declining male sperm count, 100%. And so like going back to like if there's like one thing that you would think would be biologically driven, like built into us as humans, would be the biological drive to have children, right? Because like, what would evolution want to select for other than like that drive?
Yeah,
to, like,
but
procreate?
that drive doesn't exist in a world with birth control and abortion.
So, no, it's not like every single there are women who are not on birth control that still
No,
opt
I just
not.
mean, I mean that like that the biological drive, I think, is more for sex as a right than it is for specifically our brain to go, I must procreate, right? And I think the thing is that biological drive doesn't match the technological reality.
Yeah. So you would reframe it as there is, which I totally take your point of like there's no desire to have children. It's sort of like whatever, take it or leave it. There's just the desire to have sex.
I would say that one is more prevalent than the other, right? Like I think all of us have known like a woman that's getting older and has like, you know, baby fever, right? There, you know what I mean? Like that exists obviously, and there's obviously drives to procreate. But I'm saying a large portion of our biological drives is to have sex, because up until birth control, you know, that resulted in a pregnancy if the woman was ovulating, right?
Yeah, right.
And was fertile, obviously.
Right. So like it seems like you recognize, or at least it seems like you lean towards that. The choice to have children, like it's just like a choice. It's a conscious choice. It's not like something rooted in our genes per se, or like deeply rooted in our genes. It's just like, are like the conditions of my life favorable towards that? And is there any sort of like inkling of desire in me to have a child? Sort of like divorcing it between like desire to have sex and like desire to have a child, somewhat separate things.
I would say there's separate things. I mean, obviously, you know, I think everything has biological drives behind it that kind of influence our choices for sure. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Then I think we're on the same page in terms of like, not that I care all that much, but I can see how there's, you know, we are biologically driven to have sex, but like, yeah, it's pretty much like a choice to have children, and like it's largely driven by like a conscious choice.
Yeah, I don't think it used. I mean, it's always been a choice to have sex, knowing that it would lead to that. But I think obviously birth control and abortion have given more choices. Obviously, I'm against abortion. I'm pro-choice, but I'm against abortion. So.
But you're, if I remember correctly, like pro-eviction.
Yeah, I'm evictionist. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that it seems like you're saying like that baby fever concept, that's not like an innate thing. It's not like every woman at some point has like baby fever. That's just, I don't know, it seems to be like a random thing.
I don't know. I'd say it's probably an innate thing. Now,
yeah, so
innate doesn't necessarily mean that every woman has it, right?
Right. But then
I mean, I don't have any research off the top of my head on baby fever.
Neither do I. I'm totally speculating.
I'm just speculating. Like, I just want to be clear, right? But I mean, like, it seems like a common enough occurrence that I would say that it is, you know, regardless of social context or time, right? Baby fever is a documented thing for all of human history, right?
Many people are talking about it. I can agree to that. And that's where it's, I don't know, that's curious to me of like, well, again, if there's, why would you not want, like, from an evolutionary perspective, to like have every woman have baby fever? Why would not that be innate to every woman? I don't have an answer to that other than like, it doesn't seem like, you wouldn't want that to be inconsistent, right? As for the perpetuation of the species and like your genes.
I mean, some people are gay, you know what I mean? Like that doesn't, I don't, that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like not everyone's the same. I don't know.
No, but that's the minority, right? That's like, and also there's some interesting research in terms of like the potential evolutionary advantages, the genetic evolutionary advantages of being gay, which I'm not going to get into. But like,
dude, yeah, this has already gone completely off the rails. I'm just having a podcast episode at this point, and it's fine. Like, we were going to talk about Canadian and American healthcare and like what's going on.
No, we can drill down into Canadian life.
We can. I'm just saying, like, I'm just enjoying a conversation with someone that is, you know, radically opposed to me in ideology, but it can have a thoughtful discussion, which is rare on Twitch.
Hopefully, occasionally, I have a thought or two that are actually meaningful. But yeah, if you want to, like, I'm all for focusing on healthcare.
No, I'm just saying. I'm saying like I'm fine with this conversation. We can get to it when it stalls. It doesn't matter. But no, in terms of like the baby fever phenomenon, let's connect that back to like what you were saying, right? Like or what we were talking about previously, which is like I would argue that it may be an issue, like our lack of empathy and community may be an issue due to the declining birth rates. That what we're experiencing is improper socialization of children because they're no longer in larger families, but instead much smaller families. We have fathers that are kind of not present in the household and at an increasing rates in the West. We have communities that used to, exist of 200 people, kind of like from that Durkheimian perspective, right? Of like, we used to live in these communities and then we moved to the cities and we have that anomie, right? Where we're kind of separate from society. And so I think we have a lot of confounding variables that it's hard to attach weights to. But what is clear is that I do think you're onto something. It's clear is that our empathetic capacity and our ability to connect with humans is damaged by a lot of variables, and it's a difficult problem to solve. And it seems the way that religious communities and communities that have a lot of children are much, much less affected by this. And rural communities that are not with tens or even tens of thousands or hundreds or even millions of people that they don't know, right? But instead are in communities where they know everybody, communities where they have large families, and communities that are very large do not have these same issues. Communities like the Amish or like the Orthodox Jew communities, or I recently learned about it. I want to do more research on it, the Huttites in Canada. These communities don't seem to have many of these same issues psychologically. And how do we account for all of that in a modern society, and how do we fix those problems is, I think, the $1 million question.
Yeah. And that's something that I'm grappling with myself, of like, as much as, I'm a radical leftist, and like I pretty much disavow religion, and I see like no ultimate utility in it, but I recognize that there's totally an advantage of having a close-knit, like, insular community, right? But I don't think we can afford to like all, first off, I'm pretty sure all the Amish would reject us, and also pretty sure like most people don't want to be Amish, and it's like, how do you like, what do you take from there that like we can use as, let's say, for example, me living in a city, to like recreate, because it seems like they have a more communal living to throw in that C word, and it's like, how do we live communally in those close-knit communities, like in a city, like in my apartment complex, and that's why like I'm very much against sort of,
I mean, my answer, right? My answer is that that we have forced ourselves in this predicament by using voting power and government systems to take care of the things that the community should be taking care of, and that the best way to solve this is by curtailing all of those government systems, so that we're forced to engage in voluntary transactions and associations with the communities that we choose to do, as opposed to like just giving up money via taxation so that an amorphous kind of agent of the state can fix all of our problems, and they're not actually fixing our problems. And I think there's a lot of unintended consequences from things like welfare and socialized medicine and community centers that are supposed to help. And I think that what we've done is we've stolen ourselves of community by giving it to the government to fix problems that we used to fix as a community.
Yeah, so I understand the anarchist, at least based off everything you said. You are mostly like advocating for like your anarchist perspective, and I take pretty much less issue or no issue with your anarchist perspective. It's more like that combination of, or it being tied to the capitalist perspective. That's mostly where my disagreement lies. And it's like, yeah, then like from there, like I totally take your point. Like we almost certainly like don't absolutely need government to recreate a small close-knit community like the Amish. I think that's pretty, hopefully, somewhat self-evident. Could we have the same level of like, I don't know, quality of life that like I currently enjoy? Probably not, but I'm okay with that. As in,
I don't
like,
know. Maybe.
As much as like a science nerd as I am, and as much as like whatever a techie that I am, I sort of like more and more I'm coming like increasingly disillusioned with like technology of like it seems like it's creating more problems than it's actually solving. Like same thing with like our food of like, you know, we're really great at mass producing certain types of foods, but all that has largely led to is like increasing rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, like though there's no reason like
yeah, but I don't know that that's technology, right? Like I think technology is amoral. The problem is how do we utilize that technology? And I think the problem is that we don't have a foundation of community to be able to deal with technology. I don't think technology is the problem here. The problem is that we are these unsocialized, unempathetic people that live in shitty apartments separate from community and separate from others, and we don't even know our fucking neighbors. And then we cope in our fucked up homes by ourselves with porn and cell phones and shitty junk food, and then blame others and and seethe on others for a lack of responsibility for ourselves and our families.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you there in terms of like, yeah, totally technology amoral. It's just like it is what it is, and like hopefully we can find ways to engage with technology in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's like junk food. What's his name made that analogy? Moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt, right?
yes.
He made the analogy that like it's like junk food, and like when it first hit the market, we had no idea how to deal with it, and then 20 years later, we kind of understand, and that it's just novel, and like we don't understand how to deal with it. Social media because it's novel, but like Gen Z already kind of get it to a certain extent, even though they're younger than us. They recognize like the dangers of Instagram and they as a culture kind of growing up with it, they kind of get it. And that it may be just like junk food where like we didn't used to understand just how damaging it was to us. And now we kind of get like as a society, we're beginning to understand that like shit's bad for you and it should just be an occasional treat.
I hope so. Like, I hope that assessment is correct, just because, like, that
I hope so too. Yeah,
that would hopefully somewhere on the long term that would result in declining overweight and obesity rates, declining mental health issues. But at least based off of what I've seen, like that's going in the opposite direction. And like I don't know any of the data in terms of like Gen Z and it's like engagement with social media. From what I've seen, it doesn't seem like it leads to great outcomes. But like, and here's where it's like I might disagree of like I don't know that being born let's say today or whatever 10 years ago where this technology is the norm, because like I'm old enough to know a world without the internet. Like I'm old, like I know I was online when like dial up, like to connect to the internet, it was like AOL 56K modem, and like this is like totally worlds different. Right. Where like back in the day, like my early days of gaming was like connecting to my cousin's computer through LAN, and then my mom picking up the phone and just disrupting the connection. that's
right.
My early internet. And so
my early social media was like MySpace and AOL Instant Messenger group chats.
Yeah, ICQ. Yeah. And so it's like given my experience, like I feel like, I could be wrong, but I feel like I'm better able to like engage with technology because I don't feel like my phone's a necessity. It's not an extension of like my body, as opposed to like, at least from the younger generation that I interact with, like when I let them know that like I put my phone like on like airplane mode when I fall asleep, that's like a foreign concept to them. Like,
yeah. Well, so I got my funny enough, I left so like this was maybe like 6 months ago or something, right? I was streaming on a Sunday night, and I went to drop my kids off because I get them, every other weekend. And I left my phone in the car, and I was like, fuck it. I'm going to go stream. You know what I mean? Like, I'll go get it after stream. Like, I don't care. And then like my mom,
a body part is missing.
Is like knocking on my door, like drove over to be like, what the fuck happened to you? And I'm like, what? Like, I left my phone in the car. And then she's just like, you can't do that. You have kids. And I'm like, What the fuck did your generation do? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you disappeared into the fucking ether when you weren't around a landline, and you just kind of hoped they came back. Like, why is it a big deal if my phone's off for 9 hours? Like, I get that, like, I should I should be able to be in contact, if possible, but like, I just left my phone down there. It didn't seem like a big deal. And then I remember just being like perplexed, like, even the older generation like is like freaking out because like I didn't answer a text for 4 hours.
Yeah, as opposed to like I'd go radio silent for like whatever 18 hours when I was, because there was no cell phones back then. I would just like go to my friend's house, and my mom just like trust that like, yeah, Cory's at his friend's house doing whatever.
Did you hear that kids are developing nodules on the back of their skull from the amount of time that their head is spent down looking at their phone?
I haven't read that, but that's deeply disturbing. Yeah.
It's just like little bits of cartilage from like the stress on the neck from like constantly be like looking down, because we're like not meant to look down for like that long. Yeah.
The same thing with like whatever, back issues and just being in an office space all the time. Like we are just like, we've engineered our lives sort of in the least optimal way. It feels good temporarily, but like over like 10, 20 years, like it's pretty clear we're paying a price.
I do want to bring it back. Casimir said like there's a really cool documentary. You might want to watch it on stream sometime and like just shit on them or not shit on them, but I think it might change your opinion a little bit. Called Invited to Amish Dinner by Peter Santinello. It's like he goes and hangs out with the beachy Amish. So like a lot of people when they think Amish, they think of like top hat, fucking, you know what I mean, like coverall, horse and buggy types, and these people drive cars and they have cell phones and all of this, and it's actually a really cool documentary, like based conservatism, anarcho-pacifists basically, religious conservatives that live of the world but not in it kind of situation. It's it might disturb you and at the same time like change your kind of opinion of them in a way, and it's just something cool to watch, like free content for your stream too.
Yeah, no, I'm curious, like this seems like a particular sect, at least from what I can briefly gather from a Google search, like a certain sect of Amish. Like, is this like an offshoot? Like, is this like sort of not mainstream Amish?
It's like, more common. It's actually more common. So Mennonites and beachy Amish are actually more common than like the traditional Amish that like think your soul is captured from a photograph and like they don't let their kids use electricity. Like those people are actually more rare. When people say Amish, they invoke that, but it's like, it's the same thing as saying Mormon and like thinking about like, dudes with 7 wives, like Latter-day, saying.
I just think
like,
of Mitt Romney.
right. Okay. Maybe. But like people will say Mormons and they'll think about like, these crazy people with a bunch of wives, but like they're actually the extreme minority of Mormons. It's kind of the same thing with the Amish and the Mennonites.
Okay. Fair enough.
It's an interesting documentary to like understand them better.
No, I'm gonna save it. Like Casimir pretty much always sends great content, and I always enjoy like listening and hearing from Casimir. So do you want to do that deep dive into?
Yeah, sure. I'm mostly looking as an outsider, going, what the fuck is going on with Canadian healthcare, right? Like I looked at what was this study? Just kind of like .gov shit, right? Let me go up to it. Looking at Fraser Institute, right? Which is I mean, they're libertarian leaning, but I mean, they're a well-respected think tank. And like the 2021 data is showing like absurd wait times in Canada's healthcare system. I'm assuming, like, I didn't go deep dive into it, but it seems like this was obviously exacerbated by COVID.
Yes, 100%. So Canadian healthcare, as much as I, am an advocate for its overall model, or, maybe to put it more accurately, its previous model, because in the past decade or so, maybe 2 decades, well, I don't know if you know, but sure, there's Canadian healthcare, but healthcare in each province is handled by the province. As in me in Quebec, healthcare in Quebec is handled by the government of Quebec. It's funded by the federal government, as in we receive money, health transfers from the federal government.
I can't remember. Are you the one that shits on Quebec, or are you Quebec? Quebecois?
No, I'm the type of Quebecer that Quebecois hate. Of like, I'm an Anglophone, not French Canadian, like Quebecer. Like they hate.
Do you speak French?
Not anymore. It's like long gone from my brain.
Yo, Quebecois is the easiest fucking French to learn ever. Get the fuck out of here. You live in Quebec?
Maybe I'm just an idiot.
Did you ever learn classical French?
No, French from France? No, absolutely
like
not.
Parisian French, right? Like classical or Parisian. They don't have glottal stops. They don't pause in between words. So like if you miss a word in the fucking sentence, you miss the entire sentence.
Entire sentence, yeah.
It's a nightmare. Quebecois, like the redneck French, right? Is so much easier for me to understand.
But like, believe me, it brings me great shame to admit that. It's not something that I'm proud of. And I also recognize that, like, yeah, the government of Quebec, or like, you know, Quebecois people, like they don't particularly like people like me because like I've not assimilated into their language or their culture. And so it's like at the same time, I don't resent them for that. I understand why. And like, you know, even though I'm like purely an Anglophone, even myself, I would not label Quebec as xenophobic as much as other people do. As in, I think a lot of outsiders like look at what goes on in Quebec and then say, "Oh, xenophobic province." I think that's a pretty overly simplistic. And overall, like Quebec's pretty progressive, actually, like left leaning overall.
Well, don't come to America because you already admitted you refuse to assimilate.
Yeah, no, I would assimilate to like Vermont, which is like the most like boring.
No, we don't need you voting down here, boy.
I'll go to like Bernie Sanders' state, and that's about it.
But yeah. So the wait times and like COVID, I think, seem to have been because it seemed to be and correct me if you think I'm wrong or if you have like some data that backs this up. It seems that there's a lot of confounding variables. One of it is that, like you said, each province manages its own situation. It seems that the medical associations have a stranglehold on the amount of doctors, especially that get through medical school. That there's a lot of limitations and like there are plenty of qualified, and it's the same problem in America, which is the AMA in America like makes it really strict to become a doctor, absurdly so to the point where like you can have a 4.0 and like really good GRE scores and like extracurriculars and still not get into medical school. And it's like they're literally picking people for medical school based off of like nepotism in their story because it's so restricted for no fucking reason. So it seems that there's a doctor shortage there. For that reason and others, I would say market reasons, but you know, we'll set that aside for now. It seems like a lot of nurses quit because of vaccine mandates. And it seems like because of the stress and burnout of the system, a lot of people don't want to become nurses or doctors now.
Yeah, so you are totally right when it comes to like healthcare workers leaving, and that has largely been exacerbated or made worse by the pandemic. But pretty much like the pandemic and all of the resulting consequences, that was like sort of a catalyst, or like that really sort of amplified. It was already like again, as much
stretched
as I
thin.
advocate, as much as I advocate for, you know, public funded healthcare, like I'm not going to sit here and say that healthcare in Canada was like absolutely amazing pre-pandemic, or like healthcare in Quebec was like amazing. There have been consistent calls like for decades, you know, to reform healthcare, at the very least in my province, Quebec. Like, hey, there's glaring problems. Like we're just like kicking the can down the road, and then along came the pandemic, and like that was like, you know, pretty much an absolutely failed stress test of like, you know, oh, all of these predictions that like were supposed to come true, whatever, 10, 20 years down the line, like they just came true in the course of like these 2 years or ongoing pandemic, where it's like, yeah, we had a shortage of healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers like pre-pandemic. And then as a result of the pandemic, and as far as I can tell, largely driven by burnout of like nurses. They don't really want to work anymore. Like they were overworked and underpaid before the pandemic, and like as a result of the pandemic, like they were stretched even more thin, or like pretty much to their wit's end, where they're like, I can't take it anymore. And so you just see like this massive quitting, and that like people don't want to like go into the healthcare system pretty much at all levels. And then as a result of surgeries, elective surgeries being put on hold for like, you know, lots of long periods of time, we have like this growing surgical backlog that like we have to attempt hopefully to address And so it's like, it's just like, just about everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. And
Yeah.
I'll link some articles in the chat.
Yeah, like I looked at a survey. I looked at a survey that said that like this was in 2021 when like vaccine mandates were coming out, right? That like yes, vaccine mandates are causing nurses to quit, right? But it was only like 22% of those that were quitting. Like the overwhelming majority, 70%, was just burnout, was just like low wages and extreme hours and a lot of stress, and the healthcare system was stressed, that most people, that it was the system itself was not able to deal with a pandemic, which isn't surprising, obviously. Like, I mean, like, it's a fucking pandemic. You're like, no one was really like prepared to deal with the pandemic, because hospitals don't run at like the, you know, even in America, right, where we have a lot of problems, right? One of them being review boards on whether or not hospitals can expand, and the government can literally stop them from growing, even though a private hospital wants to expand, because they don't think it meets a medical necessity, which is insane to me. But they're worried that like the market will somehow cause people to become sick because hospitals will get too big. It's a weird fucking thing. I kind of get their concern, but it's stupid central planning as far as I'm concerned. Get the fuck out of the way. But like even in America, hospitals are designed to run with like 80 to 90% of beds full at any given time. Because if only half your beds are full, you're just wasting electricity and resources.
Yeah, and then it's not, well, it's not profitable, or like, you know, it's not a good revenue generator as far as I can tell.
I mean, well, the same is true in socialized medicine. It's inefficient, and therefore it's wasting taxpayer money. One way or the other, it's just not an efficient way to run. So like it's not surprising that a pandemic hits and it's overburdened in private or public, right? But I still think it was, you know, like, of course, you know, my principles, like my libertarian principles, were livid at the idea that you're firing nurses that have like come into contact with like so many COVID patients and already have fucking COVID, and being like, you need to get fucking vaccinated. It's like, for fucking what? They've caught COVID like 4 times now. Like, these are not the people that need to be vaccinated. This is stupid. But yeah, it does seem that it was mostly just the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, that the stressing of this healthcare system has made it so, yeah. But like, it was like that was like the last thing that just kind of crunched it.
Yeah, and sort of, again, for sure, you know, vaccine mandates like drove some healthcare workers away. I don't know that it was like the majority as far as I can tell. And
no, like I said, the survey when it was coming out said roughly 22%. And it was exactly. 70% was basically burnout and low wages and working conditions.
Exactly. And we're
so
seeing
more than
like,
3 times was just the system itself, not the vaccine.
And we're seeing sort of a bizarre or like really crazy situation, and evidence sort of to the point that like it's this healthcare shortage is largely driven by like poor conditions, not only like salary wise, but just like whatever, just other variables and working conditions. Where it's like, I don't know if you know, but like about, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. So you probably understand that Canadian healthcare is like publicly funded and like, you know, it's a government run system. But
I mean, there's still some private insurance in Canada,
that's
but
pretty much what I was.
But it's not the same as America, because
no, definitely not.
And obviously not the same as a free market system, because
no, it's definitely not.
Free market. You know, if you choose to get private insurance in Canada, you're already forced to pay your competitor, right? Which is to say, your taxes are taken to pay for socialized healthcare, and then if you happen to have enough money, you can go to emergency services or other things that are private if you want a quicker, better experience, or you can even get private insurance. But no matter what, you're still forced to pay your competitor. Whereas in America, that's not really true, but it is kind of true, because you're still paying Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and all of these are, you know, I mean, all of these are essentially healthcare programs in a way. Social Security, not so much, but you're still paying for medical care for other people. And so, yeah.
And also, in addition to insurance, so again, for the longest time, ever since like the start of publicly funded healthcare in Canada, there was like no privatization, as in like you could not get a private doctor. That has changed, at least in the past like 10, 15 years in Quebec. As in like in Quebec, I think roughly like 10, 15 years ago, like some elements of the healthcare system were privatized. As in like if you wanted if you want to pay for like a family doctor, you can go and pay for one. and like some surgical procedures became pay for, which like, and that was at the time. This was brought in by, if I remember correctly, the Liberal government in Quebec. Of like, that was their attempt to address like real systemic issues.
Well,
in the healthcare system.
it was stupid to ban private healthcare. I mean, obviously, I'm against public healthcare, and I think American healthcare is better and cheaper. But even though the data goes the other way, I think that's like completely bullshit data, and we can get into that in a minute. But it was stupid anyways, because the wealthy were just going to America or Panama for their healthcare, and it was like, you're literally made a market illegal that people were already going to go to another country to do anyways. Like, what is it? I forget the exact term, but it's like medical tourism. Like, yeah, you were literally just leaving money and part of your economy like off the table for the wealthy that were going to do medical tourism for better surgeries, you know, in better hospitals in America or Panama or other places anyways. So the idea of making it illegal, even from your own, like, I believe in public healthcare, was just fucking stupid.
Right. And, you know, but during the talks of this sort of elements of privatization being implemented in Quebec, there was like the fear of like creating this two-tiered system of like, you know, just healthcare.
Yeah, but it already existed.
To some extent, yes, but I would say like it has been made worse. Not only like two-tiered system. Yeah, well, fair enough. Not only two-tiered system from a patient perspective, but a two-tiered system from an employee perspective. Because what you're seeing happen now, okay, is as a result of like, we have some elements of a private healthcare system in Quebec, which understandably, obviously pays better and has overall like better working conditions. So we have seen a migration of like nurses and doctors going and working in the private sector. Okay.
Yeah. And that because it's like better pay, and you know, it's because it's competitive and it's more competitive, and it's more high class, and it's for people with more money. So better doctors are obviously going to be in a private insurance when competing against the public sector.
But then what's happening now, in order to address, or in an attempt to address some of the nursing shortage, is like, since like no nurse or like much fewer nurses want to work in the public healthcare system, what the government does is like they contract from the private system, and like, so they're pretty much like hiring the more expensive nurses, and like
government is so stupid,
and now just come into the public sector, which ends up obviously costing overall more, because like now that they're in the private system, like they know that they can charge like at a higher rate.
With the private system being introduced in Canada, do you think that it also exacerbates communities that have limited resources, like Saskatchewan and places that are like more remote, where, you know, if you still had the illegal private health insurance, right? Why wouldn't they work there if that's like where they're from? But now they have better financial opportunities if they're a decent doctor to go work in the private system, which like draws those resources like away from those harder to find doctors and nurses to work at.
Yeah, totally. And that's why like I tend to lean very strongly more towards in favor of publicly funded healthcare, because like I as far as I can tell, like the public sector, the private sector will not like adequately address those rural, sort of more disenfranchised, or, you know, less socioeconomic advantage areas, where it's like they almost certainly don't have the resources to pay for it. And so like, what do you do with those
lodge system? The lodge system is what you do for those communities, which is actual free market healthcare. Mutual aid, but nevertheless, very good.
Yeah, I guess that, again, I'm not against that in principle. I can see how that can potentially work, but I like.
Have you ever looked into the lodge system in like America?
I have not.
In England? I'll give a real basic. So before the AMA got like a government monopoly on like, you know, controlling doctors and like who could be and whatnot, what we had was, you know, a kind of industrialization, and like there was a lot of medical needs for like miners and things like that, right? Like these communities that are doing like horribly like physically demanding labor, low wage, you know, kind of, you know, like in the beginning of industrialization and things like that. And so what we did, or what they did, right, is they kind of got together and they said, okay, all of the miners, the whole union is going to pay money, right? And we're going to take we're going to take dues and things like that. And like people that make more money, you know, will charge you more money, and people that make less money will charge you less money, right? And they all kind of agreed to do it voluntarily. And what they did then is the lodge would set up a system where they would contract doctors to like be a doctor on retainer for the medical needs of the community. And it really started to piss off the doctors, because the doctors were these elite educated people who were having lower wages because their wages were competitive and being dictated by the market, right? And they were like firing doctors like, yeah, you're not good enough of a doctor, we want a better doctor, right? And so they started getting really pissed that these low class uneducated people were telling them that they weren't good enough to be their doctor, or they weren't paying them enough money. So they pleaded for help from the government, and the government started bringing in medical services. They started creating regulations. They started limiting the access to doctors, etc. And this was kind of the death of free market healthcare. And then private insurance companies stepped in, and then it wasn't until like World War II that like that really gets tied to your employment, because the government demanded that you couldn't increase wages too high. And so in order to get workers, they started giving them benefits like health benefits and stuff. But it's a really interesting history of like how free market healthcare used to be actually much more socialist, in the sense that the lodge system was like mutual aid, and like they came together as a collective, and they were like, yeah, if you have more money, you pay more money. If you have less money, you pay less money. And like, and they agreed to do that. Well, I mean, you didn't have a job. You weren't part of the fucking lodge system. Go fuck off. You know what I mean? But like, you know,
yeah, that's where that's
one of the big problems with like all of these bullshit studies that talk about how Americans pay like $14,000 per person medically, and like Canada pays like, I think it's like a little over 7,500 now, right?
That sounds about yeah.
Right. And they're like, America pays double, and it's like, well, when they do those studies, they don't take into account bankruptcy, which is a form of a subsidy, right? So they don't minus that. They don't take into account a lot of the hospital charity work, because we don't have a public system. So a lot of hospital charities will like have, like a lot of Catholic hospitals, for example, have programs for poor people. They don't take into account that like you can basically call the hospital and be like, hey, I don't have that money. Can I pay half on a payment plan? And then it's literally half the fucking money. They don't take into account, you know, the fact that some people pay for more healthcare on purpose. I mean, more expensive care on purpose, right? Which isn't a choice if you don't have a private system. Like when I had my son, for example, we looked at Henrico, we looked at MCV.
You had your son. That's a medical miracle.
You know what the fuck I mean. When my ex and I were having our son, and she was birthing the child, right? You know, we looked at all of the hospitals in the area, and we picked a more expensive Catholic hospital because it was nicer. It had better access to doulas. Like it, you know what I mean? Like they had a really nice NICU in case something happened, right? Like we chose a better product for more money. So like comparing socialized medicine to private medicine already is a problem. And then they're like, well, yeah, it's super expensive, but let's compare like the birth rates or the, you know, the infant mortality and the outcomes. And it's like, yeah, but if you compare just white Americans to white Canadians, we have better outcomes than Canada. We have a demographic issue with like illegal immigrants and, you know, and other issues. But if you compare like demographics, it's better. And so like, yeah, like the lodge system was this really cool, almost socialist system that was voluntaristic, and government stepped in and fucked it up. And yeah, I don't know, like I that would be my solution to limited areas like Saskatchewan, or, you know, like places way out up north in the middle of nowhere, is that they should communally come together in a free market system of a lodge system. And I think it would be far better than what the government could provide.
Yeah, I'm not against that in principle. Like I can potentially, again, based off how you outlined it, but it does seem, and I think here is where like maybe some of the fundamental difference will lie, is like, you know.
Go ahead. I talked for a long time. Like, make your argument, okay. You know.
Well, I'm not really making an argument. I'm just like thinking out loud of like, you know, like it does seem like sure, that system may very well be better, but there will still be like people that like get left behind, and like that's just like at least once that like our principles in Canada, like whatever, we can have the argument whether it actually acts like this or not, like, but we want to be inclusive, as in like, you know, whatever, nobody left behind, as in like if you want healthcare, like, and you need it, then you get it.
Right.
And like that's where it's like, again, for a certain demographic, for a certain type of individual or whatever community, that your system might very well work. But I don't know, like I still foresee potentially many people being left behind in that.
Right.
And that's where it's like, also at the same time, to your point of like, if you compare white Americans to white Canadians, like, sure, I'll take your word for it that white Americans do better. I could totally see that as being true. But also at the same time, like, that speaks to, I think, the fundamental difference of like, we are potentially okay with like that cost of like, okay, maybe white Canadians don't do as well as white Americans, but since there's this hopefully overall net positive of like having a more inclusive healthcare system that leads to overall better incomes, like, we're okay with that trade-off. And I think that's where like the fundamental difference lies.
Yeah, I mean, like, I could see that argument. Like, obviously, as a libertarian, I would just say that, like, you know, positive rights are an issue, right? Like, but I'm not. I don't want to get into that because then it just becomes like an ethics debate, right? Like, I would just say it's wrong on its face, morally unjustifiable. But I would actually challenge the assertion of the idea of left behind, because I mean, when you look at like the NHS in the UK, for example, more people die on waiting lists than people that die from lack of access to healthcare in America. I don't know that the left behind analogy is actually even true. What I think is true is that, yeah, some people have lack of access to healthcare in America, especially illegal immigrants, right? And I think our immigration system has a lot to do with problems because a lot of people are fearful of going to the doctor because they're fearful of getting reported. Right. And that is something that we need to consider and figure out like what to do there, because the state kind of like, you know, and it's not like in places like Arizona that they haven't used hospital records as a means of tracking down and finding these people. So it's not necessarily an invalid fear. And that's why I said like the demographic comparison was important. But even still, I would argue that, you know, and the NHS and Canada, I think, are both great examples of the financial burden of this is growing, right? As we have an aging population and things like that, I don't know that the state is able to keep up with the way that centrally planned healthcare is designed. And I think we're going to see increasingly more and more people left behind and dying from lack of access to care in countries with socialized medicine than as opposed to mixed market, private and socialist economies like America, and obviously even more so than what I would advocate for.
Yeah. Well, again, I can see that as well. But just again, sort of philosophically, like, I don't see like, because I can agree with you that many elements of government are incompetent, and I don't know, more often than not, they, you know, do the absolutely most ridiculous solution, and I'll try to highlight that, of like going back to my point of like, what has the government of Quebec been doing in order to address, as I said, like the nursing shortage? Is like they just attempted to hire and contract like private nurses at like a greater cost, and also to hopefully attract more nurses back.
When you said that, it just reminded me of like sometimes there's this weird philosophy with like conservatives, right? Especially I think, where like they're like, oh, well, if we have a little bit more free market stuff, that'll be better, right? And sometimes it's kind of like the transition of like half socialist, half free market can be worse than either one, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's a perfect example of like the stupidity of government, right? And the inefficiency of government of like introducing some private like healthcare, and that making the situation worse. But it's not the private healthcare that's the problem. It's that the combination of the two is even dumber than just one or the other.
Yeah, but wait, there's more, and this will probably maybe enrage you even further. Where it's like, yeah, to address that, one of those issues, they've like started to like pull from the private sector that like has increased costs. But also, again, one of now, and I'll link it in the chat, the story of like, what are they trying to do to like encourage more nurses to get back into the public sector? Is what they've started to do is like attempt to like regulate the private sector, as in like, let's make the conditions worse in the private sector so that like there's like, you know, quote unquote, good incentive for nurses to go back into the public sector.
Just over if you regulate the, well, I mean, like, yeah, it'll probably work. It's just authoritarian.
And well, but it's ignoring like what the nurses like are saying, because like pre-pandemic, like nurses have been saying for the longest time, like, we want better conditions, we want better pay, we want better work-life balance, and those calls have gone like pretty much ignored. And it's only as a result of this, like during the pandemic, where it's like, oh, okay, we have to like start paying bonuses to nurses to like keep them in because we need them now. Like we always needed them, but we need them now more than ever because we're on the verge of collapse. And like now that we have like this like migration to the private system, and because it's understandably has better conditions, I'm not going to lie about that, but now it's like, well, let's make the conditions in the private sector worse so that like, you know, it's less the choice is more difficult for a nurse, where it's like, do I choose public or private? Well, now the private sector has gotten worse, so I guess maybe I'll go private as well. Like I would agree with you. That's like that's strong evidence of like incompetent government, where it's like, what are you doing? Like if you just listen to the nurses, like the nurses have been saying for the longest time, like pay us better. Like the money is there. Let us like clearly the money's there. If you're extracting from the private sector and like you're paying private sector rates in order to just like get them to the public sector, like why did you not like 10 years ago like bypass that like and like actually listen to the nurses saying, hey, give us the salary that we want, as opposed to like now that it's like dire situation, oh, now we'll spend the money. And so I don't see why in principle that can't happen, but I could be wrong. Like might just be philosophically like,
the problem isn't that it can't happen. The problem is that the government doesn't have an incentive to do that until voters get angry. Because the government's not a business, right? A business has to make a profit. And if it's not profitable, it fails, right? And if it's not competitive in the market, it fails. The government doesn't have to be competitive in the market. And on top of that, it also doesn't have to make a profit. It can just tax more, right? It can just steal and extract more wealth. But yeah, I mean, like if it was a business and it saw all of its best employees, you know, moving to other businesses, and because they weren't paying enough or they weren't, you know, making favorable enough, you know, working conditions, or they weren't hiring more nurses so that people didn't have to work overtime, you know, whatever the conditions were that were causing people to leave, right? They would simply increase their pay or they'd go out of business. With the government, though, they can not do that and then blame private insurance or blame other people or blame things until the public outcry reaches a point that says, I'm not fucking voting for you again unless you fix this. And then they'll go, oh, okay, we'll fix it. And then what do they always do is they do the bare minimum to fix any problem, because it's, you know, you have to negotiate with political partisans and combat with politics, and you have to put in pork barrel into legislation so that people can, like, you know, buy votes and all of these other things, this corrupt incentive structure in order to fix the situation. So yeah, if it was private, they would have just increased the pay and they'd have been fine. Yeah.
And again, I'm not taking issue with the anarchist perspective. Like everything that you said, in terms of like problems, potentially fundamental problems with government, and like there's just no incentive to do better, or like only.
I mean, there is. It just lags behind from like the market. Yeah. The market will punish the fuck out of you real quick if you're not providing a good or a service at a price that the market demands, right? Like you just won't be bought. Whereas the government has this lag that like public outcry has to reach a certain point, and even then, if they're getting enough money from corporations, then they don't have to, or enough fancy dinners, and you know what I mean, like, you know, like even then, you know, it's like it still might not, you know, catch up for a while.
But you know, it seems like your perspective is like just like American healthcare is like better across the board, and that like it seems like, and across
the board, no, I would say that it's better because it's private because it's more private, but I think there are specific issues that we have that other socialized healthcare doesn't have, and that the solution to those specific issues is more private industry and less government.
Because you also have like a healthcare shortage, and like I'm not going to sit here and pretend like healthcare in Canada is like in a great state.
Yeah. So in America, the average wait time went from 7 weeks to 62 days, right?
Okay. Yeah. So like 40 days to like 62 days, something like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it went by like an increase of a third. In Canada, I think it went from like 18 to 24 or something like that.
Yeah, I can totally see how wait time
right.
is like.
Yeah, wait times have always been worse in socialized medicine than in private insurance, like because there's competition. That. Yeah. But in Canada it increased. I think it increased like relative to our increase roughly the same. It's just that it was already a big issue in Canada and not so much here, and it's become like, I mean, like there's a certain critical breaking point, right? Because, you know, how long you wait to get an MRI scan is like the difference of a day can be a really big deal, right?
Yeah, depending on the condition, 100%.
Where and in America, you can get in most hospitals, you can get an MRI that day. If a doctor says get an MRI, you get an MRI that day. In hospitals that are in like in rural areas, sometimes you have to go to a different hospital, and it can take like a couple days to get that done. But like if you have a TBI, or you know, you have like some kind of like headache, and the doctor says like this might be like we need to check your brain, like that shit's happening that day. Whereas in socialized medicine, you can wait a couple weeks for that.
Yeah. So then, yeah, wait times for sure better in the United States. But like, is that the only issue that you see that needs addressing in the United States?
Well, I already mentioned the authoritarian stance on immigration is causing a lot of issues in the Hispanic community. That's another issue that I would say. I also already mentioned the review boards for hospitals being able to expand, and them saying you don't have a medical necessity. That's another thing that I think we need to fix. That is a problem, because if a company is able to remain profitable and they want to expand, they should be able to do so.
Right. And also it's like your impression, like just overall health outcomes like are better in the United States. Like going back to your sort of analogy of like whatever, white Americans do better than white Canadians.
From the healthcare, I think from the healthcare system, yes.
Okay. And do you think that holds true for like, I don't know, across like demographics? I mean, well,
no,
I mean,
it obviously doesn't. Overall health outcomes in America are worse. The problem is that it's also difficult to isolate variables there, right? Because our obesity is much higher. Yeah. Is that the healthcare system's fault? I mean, maybe there's a role that the healthcare system plays in it, right? But it's probably culture, choice, diet, you know what I mean? Like it's probably a lot of other factors that don't have that, especially when you look at the Black community, when you look at obesity and diabetes rates, is a huge issue there. So, I mean, overall health outcomes isn't purely going to be tied to the healthcare system.
Yeah, no, I totally take your point. But even just like the most, in my, maybe not simple metrics, but like, I don't know, the most fundamental metrics that we tend to use of like whatever, life expectancy, like infant mortality, like do you see those as like, you know, do you like discount those, or do you feel like that those metrics are flawed because like when you compare those numbers to like Canadian numbers?
Yeah, so I think the comparisons that is often done in studies is deeply flawed, right? I think that what we have is a system where even for the poorest Americans, wait times and healthcare outcomes from surgeries and things like that are better than in socialized medicine. Like, I think it's something like wait times are 11 to 13% longer for the lowest socioeconomic status groups, like things like that, right? So I think that even there, the healthcare system is superior, but the problem then becomes, okay, now let's look at cost, right? Because when you have a progressive tax system, like, you know, well, we all have progressive tax systems, essentially. I mean, obviously, UK has a VAT tax and things like that. They have other taxes that are less progressive. But, like, for the most part, we have a progressive tax system in most liberal democracies, right? And so when you as the individual are tying your insurance to your employment, or don't have it because you're working under 36 hours a week, healthcare can get really, really expensive. And I think that, I think that like the stress that is caused by having to negotiate with a hospital, having to like call insurance companies to make sure that your grandma's chemo gets paid. I think that those are things that like, obviously, I think that the market could solve if the government got out of a lot of things, but these are absolutely problems that need to be addressed, because I think stress has a really large impact on health outcomes, right? And when you're fighting cancer and you're super stressed dealing with insurance companies, I think that that's going to cause negative outcomes in a way that socialized medicine has other stress factors, which is, waiting lists and, both. This is a socialized system that I would be against in both America and Canada, for example, but like what medicines we're legally allowed to take and what medicines we're not legally allowed to take and what treatments we're legally allowed to do. And the idea that like, there's an experimental procedure or something that I could do, but the government literally says is illegal, right? And this is a critique of the socialized portion of both America and Canada.
Yeah. So, and I totally take your point and agree with you that, like, as someone that's one of the things that I appreciate and like about Canadian healthcare is sort of like that decreased burden of like not having to worry or deal with insurance.
It's an undeniable advantage that right wingers and libertarians don't want to talk about. I still think it's overall not as good, and I think the market could solve it, but like people don't want to admit that advantage exists.
Because like, yeah, as someone with a chronic illness, as someone who like uses the Canadian healthcare system like extensively and has for the past 2 decades plus, like it's already like stressful like enough dealing with the chronic illness. In addition to all like the medical procedures, like I can't imagine like dealing with paperwork, expenses, whatever, trying to like see if I'm approved for something with insurance. Because like I hear the stories.
The problem with that too is that like, you have a lot of political influences here. That is not the experience that most people have with private insurance. It's a very small group of people that have that. And we blow it up as like, oh my God, this is the worst thing. But like, you're talking about a very minor demographic. Like most people's experience with private insurance is, they use it when they have a baby and they use it when they get their regular checkups and they use it when they go to the doctor. It's like, it's a non-issue.
Yeah. And totally I'm biased as whatever.
Yeah, me too. I have a connective tissue disorder. I have to go to a rheumatologist like once every 6 months to a year.
Yeah, so like I'm pretty heavily involved in some like online communities like for my condition, where it's like, I'm Canadian, but there's obviously Americans in this online community. I'm like, I don't know, the complaints I hear and just like the added burden of like, I haven't been approved by the insurance. I have to like go contact like the actual pharmaceutical company and like see if I can get like compassionate use for this drug and like give it to me for free. Like it just seems like an absolute like nightmare. At least for them, it's just like the added stress, as you said. Like I can only imagine. Like I myself with like my experience, like I'm at my worst, I'm like hanging on by a thread, and then like if I have to like now worry about costs, it's like
now that I'm thinking about another like problem that I think is probably easy to fix is that most Americans I don't think know that they can negotiate these things. Like most Americans are like unaware that like what I mean. Like if they get in, let's say they don't have insurance for whatever reason and they get in a car accident and they have this like $3,000, $6,000 bill. Most Americans will stress out so much without knowing that they can literally just call them and be like, look, all I can do is a payment plan for $2,000. And most of these hospitals will literally cut half of your bill or even 2/3 of your bill off if you just get on a payment plan with them. And like, I think it works in their interest, obviously, for Americans not to know that you can do that, right? And obviously, if you're capable of paying it, you're capable of paying it. But what ends up happening more often than not is that people will just file bankruptcy on some and ruin their credit, thinking that was their only alternative. And bankruptcy lawyers often are sleazy fuckers that won't tell them like, dude, you can negotiate this. Like, you don't need to go through bankruptcy, right? And so what ends up happening is the bankruptcy is then a subsidy. Right? Bankruptcy is a government subsidy of healthcare costs, really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Right?
I
because
take your point.
Yeah, if I have a $10,000 bill and I bankrupt it, right? Well, the hospital has to recoup that cost somewhere, so it does so with increased prices. And those increased prices, you know, you go to the insurance companies, and then the insurance companies pay like 60%, 50% of what the black book pricing is, right? None of these like American costs of healthcare, nobody pays that except the government. Like the government is like Medicare and Medicaid are like the only people that like actually pay what the hospital charges. People file bankruptcy or they go through things. And so I think one way that we could easily fix a lot of problems is just simple education that like, hey, if for whatever reason you don't have that, call the fucking hospital admin, right? Go talk to the accountants there and get set up on a payment plan that you can actually afford.
Even that, I see that as a barrier. Like I can totally see like in like my worst state.
So are taxes.
Like, I don't know about, I don't have to call anybody really for my taxes. It just like happens.
Yeah, they just get stolen. You know what I mean? Like you just get paid $20 an hour and then you get a paycheck for $10 an hour and you're like, hey, where the fuck did all this money go? You know what I mean? Like, or all your products cost more money because there's taxes attached to the products,
well, yeah,
right?
So I would agree with you. Like, that, to me, that's like an advocate for taxes. Like if it was if that system that you outlined of like a payment plan that it was as seamless as me being taxed, I can see an argument for that, as opposed to like calling up hospital administrators, like, you know, dealing with that, and like whatever, starting up a payment plan. Like at the end of the day, like dealing with
Ronald
maybe
Reagan.
this is just unique to the Canadian healthcare system, but like dealing with hospital bureaucracy is like never.
It's bad. It's bad in America, but it's nowhere near as bad as it is in like when you're dealing with like government bureaucracy, because most of these people, if they're inefficient, get fired because they work at a private hospital.
I mean, yeah, sure. I'll take
you know what I mean? So it's under most circumstances, if you have a bill for $6,000, right, and you can afford, let's say, $250 a month, right, and so for 12 months that's $3,000, and you call them and say, hey, I can't afford this $6,000 bill. I don't have insurance. Can I pay a $250 payment every month for the next 12 months, right? That is a relatively easy thing to do, and most hospitals will agree to a literal 50% reduction in the cost of something with no interest on a payment plan, because they know that people that can't afford will likely just bankrupt them and they won't see any of that money.
Okay, but then my question would remain, because I don't know how often it would be, but there are still some people that like would not be able to like afford like just about anything, or like, you know, and how would you address like people that like don't have insurance through their work? Like are you advocating like it's tied to employment, like you want to perpetuate that system of like in order to gain insurance, like you have
I don't care. I mean, I don't care if people buy insurance or if it's tied to employment. I mean, if your employer offers you more wages and no benefits, but those wages allow you to purchase benefits, like I don't care.
Okay, yeah.
I actually would advocate for what the Christians are doing. The Christians are the weirdly enough, the hardcore Christians in America are resurrecting the lodge healthcare system in a way, kind of a pseudo lodge system where they have a progressive healthcare cost as a community. And what they do is it's twofold. What they do is they take insurance premiums basically from people, but they base those insurance premiums off of how much money you make. And then when someone in the co-op is like facing like an extremely expensive thing, they'll negotiate with the hospital on your behalf. And then what they'll do is they'll do a Kickstarter basically. And then Christians do donations and charity models within their insurance plan for like, let's say a heart transplant or something. Right. And it seems that the prices are actually cheaper on average than private insurance companies, while also being progressive.
Okay. Again, I'm open to these potential solutions. It's just like these seem like these are like largely localized, systems that might not be amenable to like.
No, they're not. They're not like you go to church and do it. Like they're like big companies. Let me find one. Church-based healthcare co-op. Let's see if I can just find one for you real quick. Christian Healthcare Ministries is one, I think. Looking for a healthcare solution that's budget friendly, you've come to the right place. Yeah. So like these are like large companies. Well, yeah, but I'm not saying fucking you should join the Christian one. Also, there are certain things that they won't pay for that allow them to like do with their values.
I'd imagine they don't, given their that's
like you can't get an abortion with this but that's not a problem. That's freedom of association and what you choose to pay for, and that allows people to pay for things that they believe in.
What if they don't believe in like a heart transplant? What if like they don't believe in blood transfusion?
Well, I don't know. That's your fault for joining the fucking Jehovah Witness fucking healthcare co-op thing. Like that's on you, dog. Like I don't know what to tell you.
I mean that's the thing. I don't know how these operate. Of like, is it up front of like we will only like we only give the stamp of approval on these procedures.
Yeah, they like that's part of the contract. You know what you're signing up for when you do that.
Okay.
So they usually a lot of them don't pay for birth control is another one that they won't pay for. But it's not about like whether or not you like the Christians doing this thing, right? I'm talking about the economic model, right?
No,
like,
I know. Like,
and utilizing that model, like you could even utilize it as a leftist atheist thing and fucking make it like, you know what I mean? Make it like super pro-abortion. I don't fucking care. I mean, I care because I think abortion's wrong, but you know what I mean? But you get what I'm saying, right? Like that model, I think, is a superior model. And it's very socialist in a lot of ways. It's just voluntary instead of imposed via taxation and violence.
No, again, I can't argue with that. I mean, to me, this is just like, this is already happening to a certain extent, like just with GoFundMe's in the United States. So like, pretty much that seems to be like what very often what GoFundMe's are used for is to just like cover healthcare costs. And I don't know that that's like, I have mixed feelings about that because to me it just seems largely like inefficient and like clearly not everyone is having like
but it doesn't violate rights.
No, and I agree with you. It doesn't violate, like, I'm not saying there's anything inherently wrong with it. I'm just saying that like something like that can be done like better, like just as I would argue that the Canadian government or rather the Quebec government, when it comes to healthcare, could like learn something, whatever, from you know, GoFundMe's and like the American model, that like totally treats its healthcare workers better, pays them better. Like these are valuable assets, and it's just like, you know, it can work in principle, like, and there are models where it does work. Like, it's not like every country with socialized medicine fails, unless that's your opinion. I mean, it fails
in terms of rights violations and morality and theft, but like, you know, do they have better outcomes? I think America has probably one of the best in the world. But I mean, so it depends on what your measure of success or failure is, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And like one thing that I will probably rely on, and this is like a very niche demographic of like, you know, there's data like showing, I think I've said it before, of like, you know, if you compare a patient population, for example, cystic fibrosis patients that like extensively use healthcare, like on average they live like 10 years longer like in Canada, and that's a huge almost like night and day. Already like cystic fibrosis patients like don't necessarily live the longest, and to like add a decade onto that, like that's like, to me, that's almost, in my mind, you would disagree, that's a human rights violation. Like if the United States is allowing that to happen, where there's no reason, I mean,
that's not a human rights violation.
I know, that's why I know you would disagree.
Right, like you're stating that people have a right to other people's property and labor.
Yes, I know that there's the fundamental disagreement there.
Right,
but it's like,
which is no different than just full-blown communism. It's just how much of it you think is a right. It's an arbitrary distinction, right?
Okay, well, if you want to have that conversation in terms of like that philosophical, like I'm totally open to that for sure. Where it's like, I honestly can't say with like confidence what exactly you mean. Like, I know the concept of positive and negative rights, but even to me, like, they're pretty nebulous, and like, to me, just rights are rights. Like I think I understand how you would frame them.
So a negative right is like freedom from something, right?
Yes. And positive
Right?
compelled to do something.
Well, positive means you have a right to something.
Right.
Right? So you're making the argument of a positive right, that you have a right to healthcare, which means you have a right to other people's labor, which requires that you take their labor. So you have a right to the slavery of other people.
Yes,
which is a
I
weird,
understand.
I would say is an unjustifiable position. Like you can't morally justify it via argumentation. It's illogical.
We can try, because I'm very curious, like how you would logically ground that,
Sure.
based off of what I know, in terms of like how you view property, and labor.
Have you ever encountered argumentation ethics? This is super fucking nerdy.
Yeah, obviously not to the degree that you have, but it's not totally foreign to me.
Okay, so the basic argument of argumentation ethics is kind of this. I'll just walk through it real quick and then we can maybe pick it apart. So you cannot deny valid so hold on, do you believe, let's ask some questions so that maybe we don't always have to go to all the way to the ground up. Do you believe that a moral claim has to be logical in order for it to be a moral claim? Do you believe that it can be logically invalid and therefore not make any sense and not match reality?
To me, those are two separate claims. Logical and match reality are, I think, in my mind, are separate.
I said valid, like not
okay.
like valid, like
yeah,
like logically valid.
I would reject that claim. I don't believe a moral claim has to be logically valid.
Okay, so we do have to go all the way to the bottom because you believe that like logic doesn't exist.
Not that it doesn't. No, that those are two separate claims. I'm not going to deny that.
So you believe that logic doesn't apply to a moral claim. So you're a moral subjectivist. You think morality is determined by the individual, and that there's no real thing such as morality. Maybe is that where you're deriving that
totally,
from?
I would totally make the case that morality ethics exist, and I tend to lean, to be transparent, I tend to lean more towards like. Not exclusively, but I would largely characterize myself as a virtue ethicist. But I do make some exceptions, and maybe some inconsistent exceptions, because maybe I just teased it out.
Do you believe that morality can be applied to people equally? Given the exact same circumstances, right? Is it right or wrong for one person to do something as opposed to another person to do something, the exact same thing under the exact same circumstances?
As in like. Two individuals looking at the exact same moral conundrum. And
they have the exact same circumstances.
Right, and presumably same.
For example, you have a starving person A, starving person B. Would you say it's right for starving person A to steal some food to feed themselves, but wrong for starving person B to do it because they're a different person or whatever?
Yeah, no. So in terms of consistent, I would argue that yes, you have to be consistent across the board, and that like my moral prescriptions, when I make a moral claim, I do believe that it's applicable to everyone.
Right. So, but you don't believe that claim needs to be logical?
No, not absolutely, or at least not necessarily in every single case.
So how do you justify a claim that is illogical?
Yeah, I will probably appeal to moral intuitions that I do believe are.
But no, you're saying if you make a claim that is an illogical claim, how do you justify that as a true claim if it is illogical?
By their intuition of like, I will make the feelings argument, the subjective argument, for sure.
Right, but you just said that the claim. So do you? Okay. So you're saying that subjectively, you can just make a claim and the claim is true because it feels true, and it doesn't matter if it's logically true or correct or matches reality.
In some instances, yes, absolutely. So here's where the framework, I will try to outline the framework as best I can, of which I'm operating in, of like, okay, would you agree, okay, that, moral behavior, it's action, as in like, generally speaking, to act morally, like you have to behave in a certain way, sometimes not to behave in a certain way, but basically you have to like
Yeah,
make a decision.
I'm waiting for an I'm waiting for an example of a true false proposition that you can invalidate illogically. I'm gonna be open to it. I don't know how, but this is gonna be some crazy shit I've never heard before.
I'm totally okay with being branded as crazy. But like,
no, you're not being branded as crazy. I'm just saying that the idea is novel to me. So yeah.
Okay, so you would agree that essentially, like, you know, your behavior, it requires action. Moral behavior requires action, and like inaction is part of that. And like you as a person, as an individual, you have to make a decision. Okay.
Well, inaction is action.
Yeah, exactly. And like morality, it's essentially a decision-making process, right? Would you agree with that?
I wouldn't agree that meta ethics is a decision-making process. No.
No, but you as an individual, presumably, if you are a moral agent, like you are engaging in a decision-making process. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree that if you're attempting to determine if you're attempting to evaluate the morality, right, of whether or not something is right or wrong, that is a process, and then you're making a decision-making process when you act or when you think about acting.
Right. So we agree there. Like you as an individual who is attempting to be a moral agent or exercise, you know, moral behavior, you are engaging in a decision-making process. And to me, it boils down to like, well, what compels the decision-making process? Like I probably would understand that you probably think it's logic that compels your decision-making process.
Not always, no. People make illogical choices all the time.
Yeah, so that's sort of what I would say. Ultimately, at the root of all of our decision-making processes are illogical or subjective. And here's where I will probably attempt to distill that into probably where we will disagree on like the is-ought sort of principle. As in, like, I would suspect that you would make the argument that you cannot derive an ought from an is.
Yeah, of course. I don't think you can. I would agree with Hume on that.
Yeah, so I would disagree. As in, I believe that you can derive an ought from an is. As in, I think it's obvious what an ought to be from an is. And I'll attempt to illustrate by.
Yeah. You're gonna. Okay, I'm listening.
Okay. Well, and I would ask you that maybe I'll just attempt to like psychoanalyze you. Like, how do you, like, in your decision-making process, like, why do you get out of bed in the morning?
Why do I get out of bed in the morning?
Yes.
Because I have the value of getting out of the bed, and I want to achieve that value or that goal.
You just described a bunch of is. There's no ought. Like you've described something that's a descriptive reality, but what compels you? Right,
but you didn't. But we're not asking whether or not I ought to get out of bed in the morning. We're asking what is the process by which I get out of bed in the morning. The process is that I've learned. Right, I've learned how to get out of bed. I've learned motor skills. I've the myelin sheath has been thickened in a certain set of processes in the brain, right, that have given me certain patterns, and I likely do portions of it out of habit. But at one point in time, those habits were based off of a certain value system, and I wanted to achieve that value and achieve that goal because I valued getting out of bed so that I could achieve those goals to my means. So it's a process by I want something, and because I want something, this is a process I must do, or I feel that I must do in order to achieve said something.
Oh, okay. So again, I could reframe it of like when you wake up in the morning, okay, you get out, you presumably, like just like today, you've got out of bed. Like at some point you've made the decision, like today I ought to get out of bed. And so like, why did you answer that question of like, yes, I ought to? I don't think you can answer that question by appealing to any sort of is.
Right, you can't appeal to an is for the ought. Like, I ought to get out of bed if I want to do said thing, that's my point. It's
divorced in terms of like, despite everything that you're describing, like you are behaving in an ought-like manner, like regardless of what the
you're just descriptively behaving the process of getting out of bed is not an ought-like manner.
Sure it is. Totally, because like
no, you just separated the ought is gap.
No, as in like based off of like the descriptive reality, like you behave as an ought agent, like no matter what, like you cannot justify
patterns of behavior that one does as a part of a normal routine are not some moral ought. You're just describing a descriptive is. That is what people do as part of their routine. Now, why they do their specific routine the way that they do it and why the pattern is set up is because at some point they had a value and they had an ought, and they recognized that this was a pattern that led towards the ought. It led towards the goal that they wanted to have. And they've done it so many times that they just descriptively do it. And the reason they descriptively do it in the is manner is because that is a habit forming thing that they have done to achieve their said goals.
So if you're just saying it's just purely habit, okay? Like I would say that speaks to my point of like, if you were going to say that you cannot derive an, okay, fair enough. I don't want to
saying at one point there was an ought that taught you to learn that behavior, and this remains to be a utility for you to achieve your goals by getting out of bed. You're not going to get anything done if you don't get out of bed. I think many times people struggle with getting out of bed and they don't want to get out of bed. And then they're like, well, fuck, I have things to do. And if I want to do those things, I got to get up and get out of bed.
Like
that's not a moral imperative.
Yeah, right. So I agree with you. So maybe that's a better example. What is going on with the person that struggles to get out of bed?
I mean, I don't know. Why are they struggling to get out of bed?
Yeah. So I will attempt to, I don't know, maybe.
Are they depressed?
Okay. Yeah, potentially. Yeah. So I would argue, okay, I'll put on the table, you get out of bed because you feel like it. Like that's it. At the end of the day, you can, like, I don't know, appeal to your value system. I highly doubt, your value system, it like sort of includes, getting out of bed value system. It's like, you feel like getting out of bed, you have goals, you have oughts, and the people, okay, the individuals that struggle to get out of bed, they simply don't feel like it. As a result of their subjective experience, they don't feel like getting out of bed. And you, as a result of your subjective experience, like when you wake up day to day, you feel like getting out of bed. That is what compels your behavior. As in, like, I don't know for sure, but I'm reasonably sure when you get up in the morning, you are not going through I could be wrong, you're not going through an existential crisis of like, do I get out of bed? Like, how do I bridge this?
I don't know, dude. I have a joint disorder, so sometimes it's often very painful for me to get out of bed. So
sure, yeah.
But what is this? I'm trying to understand what the proposition is that you're attempting to prove here.
Like,
can we connect this?
Yeah, I will attempt to connect it. Maybe I will fail. Okay. But like, your behavior at its root, okay, is driven by, the way you feel, your subjective experience. Now, you will probably say that your decision to get out of bed is not a moral decision, and therefore it's different, but it is still under the umbrella of a decision-making process.
But what is the true false proposition that you are making? You've yet to make one.
I don't see why I would need to make one, just because you don't need a true false proposition in order to like make any decision.
To make a moral claim about what is right or wrong, you do though. This is what we're discussing. Right. Well, that's what I was discussing about moral justifications and what is unjustifiable via argumentation ethics. Is I was explaining the process by which certain things are unjustifiable logically. Then you said that you make a moral claim that was illogical. And this is the explanation that you're giving me, which is a description of how people get out of bed based off of their subjective feelings and goals. I don't see I don't see how this is a moral claim, and I don't see how it proves in any capacity that you literally can't prove a claim illogically, and I don't see how you invalidate that.
Yeah, and that's so. I will attempt to like potentially tease apart your value system. Okay, and it seems like you're an advocate of your value system, and like living by your values. Okay, so well, you whatever vape, right?
Right.
I think that's fair to say. So, may I ask you why you vape? If you don't want to share, you don't have to. But to me, that's a very curious behavior.
Well, one, I'm actually pretty severely ADHD. Most people don't know this. They think because I can do research and things like that that I'm not. But I have an intense oral fixation. You know, there you go. Freud can tell me what's wrong with me and what my mommy did to me. But it's like I have to constantly fidget with something. So that's part of it. Part of it is a nicotine addiction.
Yeah.
Part of it is I enjoy vaping. And I pick out the flavors that I enjoy.
Okay, but
Let's
so it boils
take
down
this,
to, like,
right?
yeah. So you feel like it just overall feels good, and that and maybe there's some
Right.
perceived benefits. Would that be
We keep switching. So let's
no,
stick
no,
with this analogy,
no?
right?
I'm going to attempt to connect it to
Okay.
you as a moral agent, and maybe you would say that this doesn't fall into the realm of morality. I would say that it does. Okay, so how does your vaping or like maybe your particular lifestyle, how does it conflict with your long-term goals in terms of like leading, hopefully presumably, a long and healthy life?
I don't know that it does per se. The reason, I mean, it's a potential. Like we don't have enough research on vaporizers and things like that to know if it's a potential health hazard or not. Really.
But would you?
We know that nicotine isn't really that poisonous by itself. We know that propylene glycol isn't either, but we don't really know about the heated liquid in the lungs and whether or not that has like real big problems. If you don't clean it and you're not careful, there could be potential health issues and bacteria and stuff, but I don't know that it necessarily is or isn't.
Yeah,
let's assume that it is. Let's assume that I know and I do so anyways. It doesn't matter.
Even just extrapolating like things that you consume in your daily life, either food, whatever, drink, they are not perfectly rational decisions in the context of presumably of the goal of like leading a long and healthy life. As in like just as I do,
but the problem here is the fact that humans tend to make irrational decisions as rational actors does not invalidate our capacity for reason, number one. And number two, it doesn't invalidate logic and moral claims and propositions needing to be falsifiable, needing to be true or false. You're saying that claims and propositions need not be logical and need not be true or false claims, which definitionally makes them not a claim. They're meaningless. To say that something is good is a claim that is either true or false. My definition of argumentation ethics says that a lot of things I can prove that they are unjustifiable, which is to say that they are indeed false, despite you making them claiming that they are true. I'm not necessarily putting forward a moral claim about what I think is right. Instead, I am describing what is unjustifiable logically. And this mode of analysis on it doesn't deal at all with whether or not a proposition can be a proposition and be illogical at the same time. Like it must be a true or false statement, right? And you're saying it doesn't need to be a true or false statement. You're saying propositions don't need to be true or false, and I don't understand how any of this deals with the logic of that.
Okay. I mean, sure. If you want to break down every statement as true or false, like, sure, I will gladly concede. Whatever, every statement you put on the table has to be evaluated as true or false.
Right. That was what I was beginning with, and then I was talking about how. So what you're saying is a statement, right? A statement, in order to be justifiable as true, must be logically true. It must be logically valid. It can't be a logically invalid statement and be true at the same time.
Okay, sure. If you were originally saying like in order to be evaluated as true, it has to be like logically sound. Like, yes, I would agree with those.
That was my argument.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. But I would sort of potentially disconnect that from morality, potentially.
Why would a moral claim not need to be true or false, but other claims must be true or false? Why is a moral proposition special in a way that other claims aren't? Let's say a scientific claim.
Right. So that would probably come down to, I guess, how we understand morality. You would probably disagree with my understanding of morality. To me, that's just, I view morality as like human behavior and just like how we engage with other human beings or other sentient creatures. As in, like, me on an island, whatever, in the movie Castaway, pretty much morality doesn't really exist there. That's
right. But if you make a moral claim on Castaway in an island, right, and say that it is right for me to open up the soccer ball and turn it into Wilson, or it is wrong, right? Either claim must be a true or false claim as a claim, as a proposition.
Well, to me, Wilson doesn't enter in the realm of morality because it's an inanimate object, as far as I can tell.
Right. Well, then you would say it is not immoral to do whatever the fuck you want to do with Wilson. That's fine. That's a true claim.
Yeah.
That claim could also be false.
I'm just behaving. Like, I would say I'm not engaging in morality. Like, sure, if you want to label it as it's not immoral, as in, like, sure, you can frame it that way. That's fine. I would just say, like, morality doesn't apply. I wouldn't use language of morality or moral or immoral when I'm, engaging with a volleyball. To me, just something is not immoral. Well, isn't that like almost like de facto moral?
Well, no. It's just saying something that is not immoral does not mean that it is moral to do one thing or other to it. It's just saying that it is not immoral. These are two different claims.
Sure. If you want to frame it as like it's morally neutral, sure, I'll concede that. I'm just trying to get the point home that, like, me alone on an island, like,
right. What I'm trying to do,
devoid of morality.
What I'm trying to do right now is defend the existence of logic. That if one makes a proposition, that proposition must be a valid proposition in order to be justifiable.
So yeah, if you want to, I will gladly concede that logic exists.
Let's assume. I'm going to skip way ahead, right? But let's just assume that it is not logically valid to say, I have a right to murder you right now. We'll walk through how that is true, in my opinion, right? But let's just assume that that is true, right?
Yeah, sure. We can assume that's true.
That if it is true, it must be logically valid.
Ideally, yeah. But I'm not going to say, like, in absolute every single case that has to be logically valid.
If it's a proposition, it has to be logically valid. Otherwise, you deny the existence of logic itself.
No, I can just understand that we have multiple systems as humans, and we have a certain amount of logic.
Do you believe that the rules of logic apply in some areas, but that logic doesn't exist in certain areas? That there's no such thing as logic for statements made. What
I was attempting to do earlier is sort of illustrate that all of your behaviors, like at its root, at its core, is driven by pretty much your subjective experience. It's driven by your intuition.
Yeah.
It's driven by your subjective experience.
There are, you're making the determinist argumentation that, like, all of the factors of your biology and environment that lead up to the exact moment decide what it is that you choose. So do you deny free will?
To a certain extent, yeah.
So you're a soft determinist or a hard determinist?
I would say pretty soft at this point, but I'm not.
So do you believe that humans have the capacity for choice and reason?
So that depends on, like, the definition of choice, right? Like, when someone asks me, like, what
can you choose to stab someone or choose not to stab someone? Do you have the capacity of choice?
Me, at least me, the way I feel like I can choose. But if you ask me, I don't know, for example, what my favorite color is, like, what makes me say, my favorite color is orange? So did I have choice in that? It's just like, I can't explain that behavior.
Well, yeah, you could lie. You could say red.
Yeah, but that goes to, I'm just saying in terms of when, like, the things that I prefer, and, like, the decisions that I make of, like, I have decided that, whatever, orange is my favorite color.
All right, I'm going to continue based off of the assumption for the audience that logic exists and that you have to, propositions must be logically valid.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Otherwise, they're not justifiable positions. They're just crazy words thrown together that are meaningless.
Okay, so like, if you feel like you can ground, like, it seems like you feel like you can ground, your morality. And so, like, if you want to attempt to ground it.
No, what I'm doing is what argumentation ethics does is not necessarily ground one's individual morality. What it does is invalidate everything that goes against the right of private property and non-aggression, which would include the existence of the state as a morally justifiable claim.
Right. Like, I understand that's your position, but I don't see that as grounded in anything logical.
Well, you just denied logic in terms of proposition claims. So it doesn't surprise me that you don't see that as logical, because you denied the existence of logic in and of itself by doing so.
No, I didn't deny.
You have to universalize it. It has to be, logic has to be universalized, period. Either logic exists and propositions can be logical or illogical, or they don't exist.
No, I agree with you that it exists. Are you going to say that every single human being on the planet can engage in logic in the exact same way, in the exact same fashion?
That's not the... Every person that has a right to personhood has the capacity for reason and choice. If they do not, then a guardian must be appointed to them. Right, if someone is mentally ill or deranged, right? Then they have lost their right of consent, and they have lost their right to be able to do things because they're incapable of reason and choice.
Right. Yeah. So even then, it seems like you're being selective of like,
not being selective. Those people are animals.
Well, humans are animals, but sure, I take your.
You know what I mean when I say animals, right? Like they're incapable. If they're incapable of reason and choice, then they're like, it's not about a matter of like, do they choose to use their reason and their capacity for reason to make the decisions they're making? No, if that was the case, the state wouldn't exist. The thing is that yes, we often make decisions on a whimsy, but that is not the same thing as whether or not logic exists, and whether or not valid propositions must be logical.
Again, I'm not denying those things.
So the first thing I want to say is so going through argumentation ethics, it's kind of nerdy, but fuck it, I'm having fun. I hope you're having fun.
I'm a nerd.
So the first thing is that argumentation is a form of action that employs scarce resources. Would you agree to that? Right? Your mind is a scarce resource. Your time is a scarce resource. Your body that you're using, you're eating, you're having to sustain your body. You're drinking water, right? You're employing your mind and your body in order to argue with me.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So that means that you're currently demonstrating a preference over yourself and private property. At the very least, the ownership of oneself.
I'm not sure what you mean by ownership. Like, to me, I am myself.
You have it. You're demonstrating exclusive control over your body and your ability to drink water. And no one else is controlling you by doing this, right? You're demonstrating that you have exclusive control over your thoughts, your mind, your arguments, your propositions, your body, etc.
I am my mind. Do I have control over my thoughts? I don't know that I would give a firm answer to that. I have some agency over my thoughts, but I don't know that I have like absolute, dominion over my thoughts. Okay,
so you deny that then who has dominion over your thoughts?
Well, it depends on what you mean by control of do I have control of what pops into my
right? Do you believe that you're like under the effect of a mind control device from somewhere, or are you brainwashed somewhere?
If you are saying that my thoughts come from me, then yes, I would agree with you. I have control over my thoughts. I just wouldn't use control in that context.
But you're choosing to say the things that you're saying.
Yeah, but I'm not choosing to say every thought that I'm saying. I'm not
exactly. You're taking the inaction of not choosing those things as well.
Yeah, but also at the same time,
if the word penis pops in your mind, you're choosing not to say penis because this is a serious conversation.
Yeah, but I'm also like, same thing with here. Am I choosing to hear? Like, sure, I put the headphones in, but as of right now, like, unless I take the headphones, like,
that's a passive action. That's a passive thing that's occurring.
Yeah, but still,
that's not exerting. You're not exerting preference by hearing things. That's a passive action that's occurring.
Yeah, but it's sort of like if I were like in an isolation tank, am I choosing what to think in that moment? Like, it's hard to like for me to like make the argument like I control my thoughts. Like, yes, I am my thoughts in that moment, but I don't know that I have control over my thoughts. Like that, to me, that's like saying like to a depressed person, like, do you have control?
But what I'm talking about is argumentation. We're not talking about whether or not what thoughts pop into your head. We're talking about the things that you choose to say out of your mouth.
Yes. Okay.
Right. You're making that choice, and you're demonstrating a preference for exclusive control over your body and your usage of your mind, demonstrated with reason.
Yes.
Right. And this what I would say is that this also is the right to your body, the right to exclusive control, is also presupposed by all human action, as well as inaction. If you do something, just like when you're doing argumentation, you are choosing to do the things that you are doing or not to do the things that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I'm on board so far.
This recognition of exclusive control over your body and your mind and your maybe not your mind in the way that you say that you kind of have a soft deterministic view, like maybe like some things pop in your head, some things don't, and like your environmental factors may decide like what your range of choice is based off of the ideas that occur to you that are beyond your conscious control. But regardless of all of that, in order to disagree with me, to say that I'm wrong about something, right? Then you and everyone must recognize the exclusive control that I have. So you're observing the exclusive control that I have over my body and my ability to speak and do those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So to presuppose anything justifies the right of this exclusive control, right?
Yep. So far, so good.
Right. So to argue against that exclusive control is thus a performative contradiction that leads to an impossibility proof. If you were to say, if you were to argue against the exclusive control, you would be engaged in a performative contradiction because you're already recognizing that exclusive control by the act of argumentation.
As in, like, I'm a hypocrite, basically.
Yes, right, right. You're a hypocrite. It's a performative contradiction, right? It's not logical. It's not logical for you to have this conversation with me and at the same time say that, like, you should be a slave.
Yeah, but why don't you just say hypocrite? But yes,
right.
I would.
Well, I mean, because we're going through logic, right? Like, I don't want to use like loaded terms of not just a hypocrite. What it is it's illogical to do so because you're directly engaged with your body and your choices in an action that is already presupposes the things that you're now arguing against.
Yes, as in the way I would be behaving would be in contradiction to the way that you are behaving, and that would make me like a hypocrite. Yes, I would agree.
Right. You would basically be saying that you don't believe in your own actions, right? Your own actions via argumentation presuppose the justification for the exclusive control over one's own body.
Yep, I'm on board.
Okay. If you're on board with all of that, then you already agree that taxation is theft and that there's no such thing as a positive right to healthcare, because these things require coercion and violence against someone else to use some of their resources and their body and their things for other people. And you're making in order to argue that moral claim, you would have to contradict yourself and make an illogical statement already.
So that's what obviously that needs to be unpacked in my mind.
Yeah, I can do further unpacking, right? But like, you don't actually need the further unpacking. I'm just saying that if you agreed to all of those things, then like you're on board. Taxation is theft, and there's no such thing as positive rights that require coercion or violence or aggression or theft from other people, because you've already demonstrated your preference for the exclusive control of one's own body and the rights that I have as an individual to myself and my body.
Yeah, okay.
Unless I aggress, right? Because then I'm demonstrating that I no longer have those presuppositions, right? I'm now become the aggressor, and I'm fighting against. So if I come across from you and beat you, right? Like I reach through the screen, fucking ring style, right?
Yeah,
and I get to fighting.
The non-aggression principle,
right?
Sure.
And I prove that I no longer can justify my rights to exclusive control because I'm violating yours.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
So let me link this logic to private property, right? So in order to justify sustained argumentation, which is that we go all throughout the night, right? You would need exclusive control over property. We don't have to get into private property just yet, but at least personal property, right? For example, during this conversation, you've needed to drink water multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't be able to continue this conversation unless you were drinking that water throughout the whole situation.
It'd be more difficult, but yes, I take your point.
Well, I mean, if we continued long enough, you'd die.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
So without exclusive control of this property, no one would be able to you would need the logical consent of all like other people on said property. If you don't have private property, right, and that water isn't yours, right, but instead is some other form of property or doesn't exist, you need this exclusive control in order to make these propositions, at least over an extended enough period of time.
Even like, so I think I understand what you're saying in terms of like, yeah, I need this extension of myself in order to continue my existence.
You need the consent, right? Because you've already consented to the idea of argumentation as a justification for the exclusive control of your body, right? But in order for that argumentation to continue, you need water. Well, you can't drink that water, right, if you don't believe in private property rights, which is the exclusive control for me to get the things I need, right, that are mine, that I have gained without non-aggression, voluntarily, transactions, etc., right? Unless you have the consent, because now you know that we must have consent if we're going to violate anyone's exclusive control. If private property doesn't exist, then every person that claims this and who will ever claim this in all of the future, you need their consent in order to continue making logically valid statements.
It sounds like you're saying I have a right to this water, basically.
Right, because it's your private property. Without that private property right, you couldn't make a logically valid argumentation unless you had the consent of every person who ever has, will, or can logically try and claim your water. You'd need the consent of everyone on the planet and all of the future people on the planet in order to be able to sustain a logical argument.
Right, but is that not a positive right then?
No, it's not a positive right. It's a right to private property that you gained with non-aggression. If you were to say private property doesn't exist, right? Or that someone else has a right to some form of your private property, right? What I am arguing is that in order to maintain sustained argumentation, that you need certain things in order to do that. You need other things external from your body, water, food, whatever these things are.
I agree with you. I need whatever sustenance to survive.
But to the other things that you already agreed to, right? Which is you've already presupposed that there is a justification of the exclusive control of body without making a performative contradiction. If you were to do that and say private property shouldn't exist or private property rights shouldn't exist, in order for that claim to be logically valid, you would need the consent of every person that will ever use your, let's say, personal property, as the communists call it, because you've already admitted the exclusive control and justification that you can't violate those things. So now you need their consent, because how can you continue to argue without that consent?
But I'm not even saying I wouldn't say that I have to continue arguing, or like I have a right to. Yeah,
you could quit the argument, right? But what I'm saying is sustained argumentation thus requires private property rights in order for you to be able to make a logically valid statement. If you attempt to justify something against private property rights, in order for that to be logical, you would need the consent of all future humans that may utilize that property, and all humans that may try and have some legitimate claim to the property.
That leap, I don't know. What you just said there feels like a leap to me. I honestly don't know in terms of like when you say I need the consent of like pretty much the rest of humanity that hasn't existed yet. I'm not sure.
Right. What I'm saying is, in order to justify sustained argumentation, you must have exclusive control to other property that exists. Food, water, etc. Right?
Sure. Yeah, to pretty much engage as a human further, I need stuff.
Right. And we've already established that presupposition of argumentation justifies the right of exclusive control.
Can you repeat that?
To presuppose anything, any proposition, valid proposition, justifies the right of this exclusive control, which is the right of body, the right of your body, your brain,
yeah.
your
I am
whatever.
My body. I have no choice but to be my body.
Right. And so the other property that exists is required for argumentation. One cannot make argumentation unless they have food, unless they have potentially might need shelter in order to do so, unless they have, maybe not a bed to sleep in, but there's other property that's required in order for you to live as a human.
Yes.
Right.
Again, I'm agreeing with you, but I'm still not seeing that jump from I would need the consent of like all the unborn, basically.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is that you would need the consent in order to not violate people's exclusive control over their body. You need consent for any property that you used from anyone that could have a claim to that property, a justifiable claim. Otherwise, you're violating their consent.
Right. Oh, okay, sure. Yes, I have. If there's someone else making a claim to this water, I can't. I can't survive.
Yeah, but there would be but in the future there could, if private property doesn't exist, right? And you make the claim that private property is a myth that doesn't exist, other scarce resources, etc., right? If someone uses that, it's not just now, but it's also in the future. Because by utilization of, let's say, using up the scarce resource, let's say the food, the pig, you killed the pig, someone made the bacon, you ate the bacon, right? Someone else, if private property doesn't exist, someone else could have a justifiable claim to that bacon, and therefore you cannot eat that bacon without their consent in the future to that pig. So therefore you can't make a logical argument without getting consent from every potential justifiable user of that property.
Sure.
It's really difficult, and I super appreciate you going through this with me.
No, I do want to understand. And like so far, I'm on board. Well, even then, the concept, I'm not exactly fully on board with this private property concept, but I have no problem going with it. But like so far, everything that you've said, I
up until this point, right?
Yeah.
So it would be my argument then, it thus follows that to deny the first user, first owner, which is a rule, which is like the Lockean kind of idea of like homesteading property, the first person that goes to property that nobody owns and transforms that property. To do so, to say that that doesn't exist, that private property doesn't exist, and that private property is somehow morally wrong, for example, implies a contradiction, because saying so must presuppose one's own existence as an independent, and you'll like this, decision-making unit at a given point in time.
Yeah, I think that I understand all the words, and I think I understand the idea that you're getting across, but like I'm having a difficult time, again, linking it to like this private property of like, like I understand like what you said in terms of like I would need the consent of everyone. Like if I don't have a right to this water, then I've got a real big problem in terms of like my existence.
Right, but you can't justify it, right, unless you justify that exclusive control. To do so would be a contradiction.
I'm not, because I don't see that I have any sort of like right to exist. I just kind of like hope that no one else makes a claim to my water. Like that. I
mean, if you don't believe that you have a right to existence, then you invalidate everything else in the first section we went through.
I mean, like me, I exist. I have no choice. Well, I guess I do have a choice to exist. But
so it would, right? If you deny the right to the ability to exist, then you cannot say that it is morally wrong for me to murder you, and fuck your corpse.
Yeah, no, I just hope that we're on the same page of like whatever mutual reciprocity of like I'm not hostile towards you, and so you won't be hostile towards me, but you may very well be hostile towards me. And like,
So you would say
you know,
that it's morally there's no judgment to be made about whether or not I murder you right now and fuck your corpse.
no, I would totally label that as immoral. But
Right. But to make that moral claim now requires all of the justification that we just went through and you agreed to, with the exception of the private property thing, which you're still like not sure of the linkage.
yeah, but that's the point of, like, at least to me, that's the point of, like, someone who, if you were to like murder me and like whatever, desecrate my corpse, like, I'm pretty sure you're not going through this complicated line of argumentation to like violate whatever the non-aggression principle. Like, you are just a bad actor. It's not like,
yeah, you're bad. It's a morally bad. Thus, this is a moral claim that must be justified. And we went through the process of why you have that, why that is a justifiable claim to say that murder is wrong, for example. It's justified because it doesn't violate any of the things that would make it a performative contradiction. It would be a performative contradiction, however, based off of all of these things, for you to say to me that it is okay and it is morally good for you to reach across the screen ring style and murder me and fuck my corpse.
Yeah,
it's unjustifiable.
And to me, that's where the disconnect between, like, whatever the logic and how we behave as humans isn't, like the people that engage in murder, like, they're not going through
this is right. This is irrelevant. About what we're talking about is moral claims, whether or not moral claims can be justifiable. We're not talking about whether or not humans are always moral. They're not. I think we can both agree that humans do irrational, dumb shit. They don't appeal to their reason, and they do immoral shit. But I'm going to move on. I'm going to like just reiterate real quick, and then we'll move on, because I don't want to get bogged down in like a disagreement of the ability to understand the linkage. But what I would say is, right, is that by it would be impossible to justify sustained argumentation unless you have other property. And that if you wanted to justify using this property, right, you must have exclusive control over this property. This property must be yours. Thus, it must be a form of private property. Because if it's not private property and it's not yours, that you have a right to use this property so that you can sustain this line of argumentation, if that's not true, then you are violating other people's rights. You're violating their rights to exclusive control over their body because they have a claim on your water, on your food. Thus, private property must be made in order to maintain sustained argumentation, which is required for logically valid statements to be justifiable.
Yeah, I can get on board with that.
We're almost done. We're almost done.
I'm not like itching to, like, I'm like actually trying to like understand.
Yeah,
for sure.
No, it's awesome. So, to justify propositions and action, homesteading must be objective. Let me explain. An individual can change property through action, right? I can burn down a house. I can, break a pen. I can change property through my actions as a person, right? I think we can agree to that.
I would agree with that.
But the issue is that I cannot control the evaluation of change to value of other people's property.
Can you repeat? You cannot change the evaluation of value of other people's property?
Right, the change that I did, right? So if I burn down your house, I can't change the evaluation of what they thought about their property.
Oh, but you basically can't change what it means to them.
Yeah, I can't change. I can burn down the house, right? But I can't like change like what the house was worth to them before and after.
Economic or sentimental value it had, well, sure, yes. As in,
right,
their subjective experience of their house is their subjective experience.
Yeah, their subjective experience of the value. Like we might be able to test this in some regard in terms of like, if you could get a perfect replica, how much work would they be willing to do in order to pay for it, right? And we can kind of maybe figure out what its value is. But again, that subjective evaluation will also change over time. Over time, they may be less attached to it and it may be less valuable to them, or, you know what I mean? There's totally all those things.
Time dependent. I'm sure like whatever 20, 30 years down the line that evaluation changes. But yes, absolutely, I agree so far.
Right. So in order to actually understand the value of private property, right? So to negate this kind of a thing, in order to actually understand the objective value of property, right? We would need to interrogate all humans on Earth at all times and all other people that might come and evaluate the property, right? In order to say that I can actually know what the value of that property is to that person, I'd have to interrogate them. And especially if private property doesn't exist, right? And you argue against private property, now you would also have to interrogate every person in every locus of time in the future that will have a legitimate claim to this property.
Sure, I can get on board with that. You basically, yeah, you would need to survey infinitely all people.
Right. So thus property must be private and value measurable by exclusive ownership without prior agreement.
What exactly do you mean by without prior agreement?
So like you don't need consent from other people to drink your glass of water. You don't need prior agreement. You have exclusive control over your property.
Sure. Yes. It seems like you're viewing pretty much private property as like an extension of oneself, and like, yeah, I don't need consent from someone else to engage with things that are an extension of myself.
Yeah, they're yours. You own them, right? And you have exclusive control over them. Not necessarily that they're an extension of yourself, but you have to have exclusive control over them in order for any functional system to work at all.
Yeah. So far, I can tentatively get on board with that.
All right. So now I'm just going to read you my own summary of the thing, and it's very, very easily in a couple sentences. And it's just a summation of the entire logic of what we just went through. Being alive and forming a proposition is a performance that only the libertarian ethic is valid. Otherwise, latecomers would have a legitimate claims to things or property is defined subjectively. Doing so would make survival impossible as independent decision-making unit in time. Thus, no one would be able to make a valid proposition.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, of course. So being alive and forming a proposition that has to be a justifiable proposition is a performance that you're engaging in with your body in exclusive control. And that performance is that only the libertarian ethic is valid. That's the bare minimum. Like the bare minimum is that you have to respect non-aggression principle, and that you can't that it's not justifiable to aggress upon people, and that private property exists, and that you have the right to exclusive control over it.
Yeah, I can understand and accept that. Yes.
Right. If that wasn't true, latecomers, which is other people that may have justifiable claims to your property, would have a legitimate claims to things or property, and this would be defined subjectively. Value and everything would be completely subjective, and they would have legitimate claims to your property. Unless you have private property and exclusive control over that private property.
Sure. Yes, I can accept that as well.
And in order to do that, so while still making valid propositional claims, moral claims, right? Survival would literally be impossible. You could not continue as an independent decision-making unit making valid moral claims unless you have said exclusive control over your private property to drink water and shit.
I can accept that as true also.
Right. So to argue against the libertarian ethic of non-aggression, right, and to argue against private property rights and the right to exclusive control over that private property and to violate those rights is a morally unjustifiable position. One cannot do so.
So you brought in at least as far as I could tell, up until this point, you haven't used the word moral yet.
Okay, it's an unjustifiable claim. It's a proposition to claim against it.
Sure, I can accept it as unjustifiable. Yes.
Right. So then you can't do it and be logically true. The only right.
Yeah, I can agree with that too.
And in the very beginning of this, you said that moral propositions don't need to be justified, and if you universalize that, logic doesn't exist. So if you accept that logic exists and propositions must be justifiable, moral propositions, in order to be true, must be justifiable. So if you say it is good that we take some form of taxation against your will to give healthcare to other people, if you simply follow the logic, that is not true. That is not a justifiable position, and you're engaging in a performative contradiction. That you're a hypocrite, and that's not true, and that it cannot be true to make the claim, for example, for socialized healthcare. That is an untrue position to say that that is a moral good. You're simply admitting that you're a criminal that is enforcing violence against people to do so.
Yes. So yes, I understand the framework that you've outlined, but then like it's only like towards the end, it's like I have no problem granting you that like whatever to violate or go against anything that you've said is unjustifiable. But then I don't say that, I don't see that as inherently linked to morality, where it's like you can behave in unjustifiable like as you just sort of said, like we as humans, we behave all the time unjustifiably.
Yes.
And so it's like almost irrelevant of like, sure,
right. But we're not talking about like what actions occur in the world. We're not talking about the ises, right? What we're talking about is the ability, what argumentation ethics does is it is the ability to invalidate moral propositions that other people make. So when people say it is a morally good thing, so let's say, for example, when people say private property is evil, it's wrong, it's exploitation, I can use that framework of logic to prove that that is not true, that that is a false statement. They can say it and they can act on it. They can use violence. They can use those things, but it is an untrue statement. I can say that is ethically wrong because proves that that statement is wrong.
Right. So that's where I guess the fundamental like I would, given your framework, as I understand it, like I would agree with you that like you can label that as like I'm also
untrue. I'm gonna also DM this to you so that you can like read it. It's my notes of a longer piece. Just because I'm sure how the fuck now I have to find you. Hold on.
We've DM'd many times before.
I know, but I had to search in another thing. So these are my notes on Hoppe's Hans Hermann Hoppe's not his argumentation ethics 1986, but like his like revision in 1993 in chapter 12 and his republishing of it in, I want to say 2015 or 17. But regardless, these are like my notes condensed. But I think it has all the principal elements.
Yeah. And that's where it's like, you know, I can agree with your framework. I guess off the top of my head, I can agree it's logically sound. But that's where it's like I don't see how it. I see how it applies on paper. I don't see how it applies when it comes to like human behavior of like
It's not a matter. It's not a matter of human behavior, right? It's a matter of which I mean it is technically, but what I'm saying is what this does is invalidate other moral claims. So how we evaluate that human behavior, whether or not we say something is right or wrong to do, whether or not something leads to conflict or leads to the minimal amount of conflict. Now, there are tons of other moral claims one might make, right, that are not handled by argumentation ethics, right? One may say it is immoral, for example, to drink coffee, as the Mormons do, right? Argumentation ethics doesn't invalidate or validate that claim, right? What it invalidates is people that go against private property and people that advocate for aggression. It says, no, those are morally wrong. So it invalidates the socialist. It invalidates those arguments as morally right things to do.
So I would just probably use the language of potentially unjustifiable. I can potentially get on board with.
Right. A moral proposition is a proposition. A proposition must be justifiable. If a proposition is not justifiable, then it is not a true proposition.
Sure. I can agree with that. But that's where, again, going back to like the disconnect, it's just
my
like,
chat. Sorry, hold on. My chat has just been going wild. And then I glance to like every now and then I try and check chat, you know, but like during these conversations, I don't as much. And then the last thing I see is just don't take edibles from a stranger. That's good advice.
Good life advice. Yeah. Spread the good word. Maybe that's they think I'm on edibles because I'm so crazy. But
No,
so,
you're not crazy. You're a lefty that was willing to go through the entire logic tree of argumentation ethics, and I would like to say that that is the first time I've ever met one.
Like, I want to understand your framework, because, like, I think you're an intelligent person, and like you're obviously coming from somewhere, and you have strong beliefs. And if I disagree with you, like, I have to like understand. Well, ideally, I would have to understand your framework, and I want you to basically like present your case. Like, this is like, I want to litigate it, and like, so present your best case, and hopefully from there, if I actually disagree with it, like, I would want to like, pick it apart to show where I disagree, like why I disagree. And
I DM'd it to you so that if there was any questions or anything, or you wanted to go through something, it's like it's there in text in front of you.
No, I would totally like, we'll go through it on my own. I'll probably have like further questions, but like,
I'd love it.
And like, I like want to bring it back in terms of like, yeah, I agree with you, or rather, like, it seems like, yes, this is an evaluation, and it seems like you yourself recognize that there is a disconnect between like this evaluation and just like how humans behave, like in the real world. As in, like, I think you would agree that like people who engage in whatever murder, they're not like, they're not going through this type of like argumentation or like this type of like thought or cognitive process.
But it's not about that. It's about the observer, right? It is about the observer evaluating whether or not a claim is moral or immoral, or whether or not it can be justified, right? So it's not about the action itself, right? And whether or not people are going to go through this whole argumentation ethics shit, right? This is, and by the way, this simply just justifies the non-aggression principle and the right of private property. You don't need to do all of this. This is just the logic of justifying why this must be true, right? So I mean, like, you could just summarize this down to the non-aggression principle and private property are absolutely true. These things are moral, and to argue against them is wrong. That's literally all you can say. But people don't accept that, so you have to explain why, right? But I mean, from the individual actor, don't aggress upon people, don't violate private property. There you go. But this is about the evaluation of people that make moral claims, and us being able to say, no, that moral claim is false. That actually leads to conflict. And that conflict, and by your very argumentation, you're engaged in a performative contradiction. It is a false claim that leads to conflict. And what I want is a world with the minimal amount of conflict.
Right, right. So, and I agree with you. Obviously, I want the world with a minimal amount of conflict. And it's like, so then how do we do that? In terms of like, do you think or feel that like, in order to like produce more moral agents, like that you just need to logically, like, everyone should just go through this argumentation and then like it'll naturally follow.
Dude, if every human could go through what we just went through, the world would be a better place by humans having that capacity. Let's be honest.
I don't know about like.
There would be a lot. There would be a lot. I would. Yeah. It would be cool if it was taught in schools, Casimir. But I mean, what I would say is, I volunteer as tribute, right, to teach as many people, like as Casimir said, as many people as necessary about this. But what I would say is that what is necessary, right, for the minimal amount of conflict, is that individuals follow the non-aggression principle and respect private property rights, because to do against that is inherently conflict. It is conflict.
Yeah. So like, basically those two rules of like, don't violate the non-aggression principle, don't whatever violate private property. Like, those are, I guess, the bare minimum rules that you want to see whatever play out in the world. But then,
well, actually, if you follow those two things, anarcho-capitalism logically just follows from that. Like, a world that does not violate the non-aggression principle and everyone doesn't violate private property rights simply is anarcho-capitalism. All of the other theory, all of the other arguments, all of those other things really are just a matter of explaining how that works logically.
Right. So, but then to me that begs the question of like, how do you get people to follow those, I don't know, two principles, two rules for life?
Yeah, I mean, Casimir's right. For ease of conversation, I say them as two things, but really it's just non-aggression principle.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, fair enough.
Right.
Because like, yeah,
Because you don't aggressive on people or their property. It's really just the NAP.
yeah. So even like whatever that one principle, but like, how do you get people to follow that non-aggression principle? As in, like, people are violating it for a reason. And like, sure, I'm potentially all for this being taught in schools, okay? But obviously I don't know for sure, but I highly suspect that like how effective this would be. As in, I don't think that this would be like changing minds of like, oh, now I should just like be non-violent.
Yeah, well, I'm not like the tanky or like the hardcore like communist, right? I'm not arguing for a utopia. I'm not arguing that like once everybody understands this, they'll somehow just become moral, actors in all the things that they do. What I'm arguing is about what we can justify, what we should be justifying, right?
Right.
Right. Like, and we can't justify. You logically cannot. It is logic. It is not true. It is false. It is unjustifiable to advocate things like coercion, of forced taxation, war. All of these things are unjustifiable. Well, maybe a defensive war, but that gets into a much more complex thing.
Yeah, we're on this. I agree with you. Those are largely unjustifiable. But that's like, how does the person who violates the non-aggression principle, like, how do they justify that to themselves? Sort of like, the individual who's violent, or I don't know.
Restitution.
No, in terms of like, what is the person who is violating the non-aggression principle? What are they saying to themselves that like allows them to violate that? In terms of like,
it could be any number of things. I mean, people do irrational shit all the time.
Yeah, and that's what I'm most concerned with, because like it's pretty much like you agree, and even it seems like based off of what you outlined, I would agree that like anyone engaging in violence towards another person is acting whatever illogically or irrationally.
Right.
But then like, so then how do you correct this irrational behavior? And it seems like your answer is like, well, they just need to be a more rational agent.
No, that's not my answer. No, of course not. Like Casimir had hit nail on the head, right? The criminal believes that might makes right, right? And so what they need to do is they need to be forced to pay restitution for their crimes. So if I steal from you, right? Let's say I steal something from you, right? Then you have the right to steal it back. You have the right to use force to take it back from me if I refuse to give it back to you. You have the right to voluntarily hire people of any capacity, or maybe you have a police force that you hire or whatever, right? To track me down to correct this mistake, right? And this person is forced to pay restitution. Let's say they destroy the item. Then we need to come to some form of agreement via like courts or, some voluntary thing in order to get restitution back. If you steal my TV, I have the right to steal your TV if you can't give me my TV back, right? Some form of agreement, some form of restitution needs to be paid so that you are no longer a criminal, right? This could even, if you murder someone, then you can no longer justify your position. And it is, while I disagree with it personally, and I don't think a market would do that, it's perfectly logically valid to murder that person back. But I would say that market systems likely wouldn't engage in that, because the moment you murder an innocent person, you get into like a Hatfields McCoy situation, right?
Yeah,
so it wouldn't be the appropriate.
It works in whatever theft or whatever, but I don't know how restitution works when someone's life is taken away from them.
Right. Well, if we had a magic machine, right, where you could walk into the machine and you would die, and it would be a perfect resurrection of the other person, like, then that would be restitution. We don't have that magic machine, and therefore people have a right to seek justice and vengeance against those people, because they cannot argue against the law, the non-aggression principle, because they have already shown themselves criminal, and on top of that, they can't pay restitution. I wouldn't advocate killing that person, right? But we're talking about what is unjustifiable.
But how is that restitution if like that person, if the person who is the victim, whose life is lost, like they're gone? I don't see how you can ever like
Yeah, I mean, like murder is a really hard thing, right? And then also, but we already talked about, right, that like one of the reasons for the justification of private property is the fact that the evaluation of property, right, is subjective, right? So like, even let's say I rape you, right? Well, like, is it really the same if you just rape me? I mean, that purple lighting's really got me in a mood there.
The
Cory.
bisexual lighting.
The bisexual lighting's got me in a mood, right? But like, is it the same exact thing to rape me? Well, like, I don't know. Like, maybe you're right. Maybe I really do enjoy it. Maybe I'd love to get raped.
That's like a lifetime of trauma. No offense to you.
Right. And that might also cause trauma. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I would enjoy it. Maybe I'm a secretly, I'm a big masochist, right? And I'm into consensual non-consent. And like, I just would love for this giant fucking police officer you hired to just rape me. And I would be like, I'd be so into it, right? So, I mean, like, there's a lot of issues with the evaluation of that. And that is why, we recognize that crime occurs, right? What we're talking about is what is morally justified and what can we say is not morally justified. We're not talking about ushering in the utopia, right? And so, yeah, there are problems, but the solutions to those problems can't be additional violations, right? And the systems that we've set up within our state-based system are essentially the kindergarten explanation. Two wrongs don't make a right. So if you set up a system to correct these measures, and that system requires taxation, which is theft of those people's property, which is mixed with their labor. It's in a form of enslavement. And if it requires if it requires other forms of violation, it's the same thing with like, how do we give healthcare to poor people? We want to give healthcare to poor people. We want them to be better. Like, that's a good thing to want in the world. But if your solution to fixing it, right, is to take money and resources from other people involuntarily, what you've done is you've created additional conflict and violated their rights. And that is not a morally justifiable thing in order to solve this other problem.
And I think I take your point. I think I understand where you will go in terms of like, yeah, taxation. Like, for you, taxation is involuntary because, like, I think as you said previously, like, you never consented to sign up to whatever the experiment of the United States. But then
you could have a voluntary form of taxation if you wanted, right? It's perfectly reasonable for you to sign a contract to live in like a Prospera or like some community, right? And they have all of those systems that you like of government set up, and they have and they do it via a form of taxation. The difference is whether or not it's voluntary or involuntary. It's not a violation of your rights if you voluntarily say, hey, I want to live in this really cool society. Quebec becomes Ancapistan tomorrow, right? And all of the people of Quebec, they all sign a contract to maintain a system of governance that you personally like. I know it's a magical fucking fantasy that would occur that way, right? But that's how they want to live, and everyone agrees to do so, and they do so by contract. There's no violation of rights there.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Again, I'm more or less on board with sort of the anarchist perspective to a certain extent. I'm
talking way too much. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. Because I do want to understand like your position as best I can. But then there's nothing, as far as I can tell, I could be wrong, but like, there's nothing stopping you from. It seems like basically there's no system or there's no country in existence where you feel like you can set up the type of society that you want to set up, as in like pretty much no other country.
Right. Like, the best place right now is America, and the beachy Amish do the best that they can, but they still pay taxes.
I mean, couldn't you hypothetically, this is a little bit ridiculous. There's some like unclaimed territories that you can go to.
Yeah. So an example of this is, have you ever heard of Liberland?
Yes, I have. Yeah. That's a very tiny,
I mean, it's obviously a state that they're setting up. It's a minarchist state, but it's obviously much, much better. Right. Or at least they're attempting to. I think it's kind of a pipe dream, but technically speaking, they should be able to do so. Whether or not, the UN will recognize them and things like that is a totally different stuff. Plus, it's only 7 square kilometers, which is,
I remember,
or 7 kilometers squared. Sorry, not 7 square kilometers. But yeah, I mean, like, if there was a place like that, and I had the resources to go there and I could take my children with me, I would do it.
Yeah, I understand that this is like an overly simplistic solution and doesn't track in reality or unrealistic. And even more unrealistic. I think there's like unclaimed territory in the Antarctic or like the North Pole as well. I think there's even large portions of like the North Pole
there's government treaties, right? That they basically that like makes homesteading internationally illegal there.
Yeah. And so
plus it's not really hospitable.
Yeah, no, I'm being.
I mean, I do kind of like the idea of seafaring once the technology's there. I mean, have you heard like libertarian theories on that? Like just building like a bunch of ships or that like, you know, with like greenhouses and things like that to create a city in the ocean in like unclaimed territory.
Yeah, I've watched some videos about that, and like
it's a fucking sci-fi fantasy at this point, though.
I think I'm like, as I evolve, or maybe in your opinion, de-evolve, like I'm leaning more towards like whatever an ANCOM or like whatever. I think you would maybe label it as like anarcho-primitive or something like that, like of like pretty much pretty overly simplistic lifestyle, or like a minimalist lifestyle.
Right.
But if I can hopefully attempt to get you to like understand my framework of like, you know, why I can see how it can be viewed as ridiculous, because I'm trying to sort of get you to understand how I view human behavior of like, why do the people that I would agree with you are acting immorally? Why are they acting immorally? Why are they acting illogically, sort of irrationally? And going back to like that decision-making process of like, so going back to my original example of like, yeah, you vaping, like, would you agree or disagree, or like your guiding principle of like the foods and drink that you consume, would you say that they are perfectly rational given the goals and values that you have?
I would say the overwhelming majority of decisions that humans make are not based off of like a rational analysis.
I would agree with you.
Unless you're an objectivist, like some of those people might actually, a majority of their decisions might actually be rational, but those guys are a different breed.
And I'm going to attempt to bring in what Casimir is bringing in of like vaping is not a conflict. And I would disagree in terms of like, I think there is a conflict there. Maybe not some, you know, geopolitical conflict, but like, okay. So in terms of like what your goals are and what your values are, you know, and I think you shared recently, like you're trying to be better. It seems like you're trying to implement healthier choices. Is that like a fair assessment? I think
sure, why not?
Like you tried out ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
And so it's like that's fantastic, which I would all support. And if there's anything I can do to help, by all means, feel free to reach out. But to me, there is a conflict in terms
fair
of like
enough.
if I zoom in of like, what are your goals as a person? What are your goals as a father? I'm assuming, I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that, you know, you're vaping, or like if you were to lead more unhealthy lifestyle, make more unhealthy lifestyle choices, there would be a conflict between your goal as a person and your goal as a father.
Right, but that's not that's not like you're talking about conflicts between values and goals within yourself. You're not talking about aggression, which, right? Like you're talking about something different here.
Yeah, but that's where it's like, to me, that's more like the realistic model of human behavior of like, humans have values, humans have goals, and like people, like when they're trying to engage in morality, like they're not like engaging in this argumentation ethics. Like they are sort of evaluating what their goals are, they're evaluating what their values are, and then they like behave from there.
Yeah.
As in like you have presumably you have all the motivation like on paper in the world to like, you know, live a long and healthy lifestyle, because I'm assuming, you know, you want to be a present father, and you want to be a good father, and you want to whatever, watch them grow, develop, etc., etc. And like leading a long and healthy life, I think, is like most in line with that. And yet despite that, it seems like some of the choices that you made, maybe for example in the past, and it's a recent development, that like the choices that you made were in direct conflict with those goals. And I'm not saying that you're like an immoral person, but to me that's like a testament to sort of like the fundamental nature of your decision making.
I disagree.
Process.
I disagree. What I would say is that what I've done in the past has proven that I didn't value those things as high as I did my hedonistic enjoyment. I only post hoc rationalize certain things, right? Like obviously if I ate pizza, I valued the pizza in that moment more than I did my overall health and in those goals.
Right. So then I would ask the question of like, now, given that potentially your values and goals have shifted, is it now just like all challenge free when it comes to your decision making process of like food, drink, consumption, of like, oh yeah, this is since this is my value system now, everything just like seamlessly naturally follows, and like the decision
of course
to
not.
Yeah, and that, to me that's also my point, or like the testament to the fundamental nature of human behavior. Of like,
look, I've read probably just as much of the neuroscience on this as you have, right? Like even to the point of like, you know, certain functional magnetic resonance imaging, like stuff that shows that, like, you know, that theorizes, we'll say, or hypothesizes that like decisions are actually made before the conscious thought even occurs. The thing is that what we're talking about is the capacity for reason, and the conflict is between other individuals. It is not a morally unjustifiable claim from our philosophical framework, right? For me to do harm to myself. I have the right to do that. And so what this means in terms of like, well, what does it mean when you say you have the right to do that? What it means is that other people don't have the right to interfere to stop said thing. That's what it really means. What we're talking about, right, is like, if I see you light up a blunt, I may disagree. I may say that's irrational. I may say that that doesn't go with your values, that those are the things. What I don't have the right then to do is to then stop you, to go up to you and smack it out of your fucking hand and smack you in the face and say, what the fuck are you doing, Cory?
Or rape me.
Or rape you, right? whatever it takes to stop you from smoking that Mary Jane, all right? We're not going with Mary Jane, all right? We're going with Michael Jane, and Michael Jane's a lot rougher. But you get what I'm saying, right? Is that like, so that's what we're talking about here. Like, you could make other moral claims, other moral systems, a Christian ethic, you know, a utilitarian calculus, whatever the fuck, however you want to derive at that shit, right? What we're talking about is, you know, we invalidate your right to then use violence and coercion against me based off of some other previous moral claim. Because this is now a new moral claim, which is you saying it's so bad that I get to use some form of legislation, or I get to use some form of police action, or I get to use some form of coercion, right? Or I get to use some form of limiting your ability to engage in the free market to stop that behavior because it's bad. And we're saying you can say the original thing is bad all you fucking want, and I don't care. You make that claim. We're not saying that that's an unjustifiable claim. What is unjustifiable is that force and that coercion against me for doing that.
Yeah, and that's why it's like, I think I understand the logic and like the framework. It's just like, I don't see it like, as you sort of brought up earlier, of like sort of the association between like conservatism and disgust, right? Where it's like there seems to be a strong association between like conservatism and a strong like disgust response, and this correlates to, I think, a lot of, you know, conservative beliefs. In terms of like, you know, they are
discuss mechanism is like literally the highest fucking predictor of conservatism,
right? And that's I think it's fair to say that's an emotional an irrational process, and it leads.
I don't think discuss mechanism de Gore is necessarily irrational per se.
Well, so yeah, given the framework, but either way, like maybe not irrational, but an emotional process. It's a feeling. I think you would at least agree with that. And then I think that informs their views, and like that informs their decision-making process of like, you know, is whatever homosexuality, you know, morally justified? I don't think, I think even you would agree that's an irrational position. And yet despite that irrationality, like they cling on to it.
Oh, no. I would say that's perfectly rational. What's irrational is using violence or coercion to stop that. It's perfectly rational to say, you know, I think homosexuality is a sin and it's wrong. But what's irrational is to say, you know, sodomy should be illegal and we should use the police to stop it. What's irrational to say is, you know, I heard in 1973, you know, in New Orleans, there's a gay club burning down. Let's bar the fucking door locked and let them burn. Right. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing irrational about making a moral, at least as far as I can tell, or that I haven't discovered yet. Right. Like I won't like argumentation ethics wasn't discovered until 1986. Right. So, I mean, there may be other forms of objective, rational, justifiable and unjustifiable positions that have yet to be discovered or that I do not know. But as it stands right now, I can't come up with an argument that says it's irrational. I would make the opposite argument, that I would say that, like, dude, let people love whoever they want to love. And that's my personal belief.
Yeah, no, I take your point that whatever, in the conservative framework that they outline for themselves, like being against homosexuality, like, sure, is rational. But like, I think the deep underlying like motivation or like their opposition to it is like, you know, rooted in the brain of like their sort of like disgust response. And there's the aspect of religion, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it is likely that it is a form of disgust mechanism, but where that disgust mechanism comes from is likely, you know, there's a multitude of factors there.
Yeah, and so I'm going to attempt to appeal to your moral intuitions then, in terms of like, so you've been confronted with the trolley problem before, and like,
yeah, I answered like a virtue ethicist. I just like,
yeah, like you just
try and stop the trolley. No, I'm going to do everything I can to stop the trolley.
Yeah, but you wouldn't pull the lever. Like you would do whatever it takes, like with your intention, like to stop the trolley, and whatever, maybe put your body in front of it, but you will not pull the lever to like.
I might pull the lever if I think that I can make it to the one person that's going to be murdered and rescue them, but I can't and don't have the time to cut the rope for the 5 people. I will do everything I can. I will do everything I can to save people. That's what I'll do.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, of like, you wouldn't pull the lever, but you would just go save the one person, or like whatever's the most expedient that you can carry out, you will do, but you won't pull the lever.
I'll do everything I can to stop the murder to the best of my ability. Period. I won't just pull the lever and be like, oh, one person's going to die. If I don't think I can do it, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to do whatever I can do.
I'm not sure I fully understand your question in terms of like, you know, you see the trolley and you have the lever, but instead of going to lever, like you go to that whatever, since you can't push 5 people off of a track, you'll just go and push one person off of a track, like you yourself.
Yeah, I would do everything I could to get them off of the track.
Yeah, okay, then I think I understand.
Or I might stand there crippled in fear and later think that I'm a coward later, but what I wouldn't do is murder somebody. And it wouldn't be a justifiable position to do so.
And so, and if I understand your framework correctly, in terms of like you would act as a virtue ethicist, it would seem like, you know, you would not touch the lever because like that would sort of bring intention in, as that like you pulling the lever would like demonstrate intention, and so like you are sort of acting with intention.
The real answer here, right, is that nobody knows what we would do in these absurd hypotheticals, right? We would just do and we would evaluate later. The difference is what do we evaluate later as a morally justifiable position? And later, it is not morally justified to pull the lever to murder someone. That is morally unjustified. You cannot logically make that decision.
Logically, yes. I would potentially agree with you, and this is
right, but who knows what the fuck I would do in that situation. You know, Liquid Zulu gives me shit for this because of the whole steal a penny to save the world. It's like, I recognize that it's morally unjustifiable and I recognize it's a crime, but like in that position, would I steal a penny to save the world? Probably. Like, who the fuck wouldn't? You know what I mean? Like, your intuition would be so fucking strong that you would likely do it regardless. But that's not, but that doesn't evaluate what is morally right or what is morally wrong. You're just talking about how humans behave in reality.
Yeah, and that's what I'm most concerned, as in like, so I'll try to like maybe distill it or like, you know, put it in hopefully crystal clear terms of like, let's say trolley problem, whatever, 5, 10 people on like one side of the track, and like one of
our
your
intuitions
children...
are right. But our intuitions change every time we change this problem a little bit, right? So if I told you right now, gun to your head, right, that there was a that there was a 10-year-old girl, 10-year-old innocent kidnapping victim, right? And this girl had to be raped by you and you had to ejaculate inside of her, and you had to do this every 24 hours. And if you don't do it in a 24-hour period, a nuclear warhead blows up New York City, right? All of a sudden, you know what I mean? Like, your moral intuitions start to change here, right? You're like, I'm not going to continuously rape and impregnate a 12-year-old girl to save New York City. You're going to go, fuck New York City. I'm going to figure out who's doing this and save this girl, and I'm going to kill a motherfucker.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Right? So we can take the trolley cart problem in such an absurd degree in one way or the other, and eventually it falls apart. Right. But what you're talking about is the reality of the situation versus what is morally justified. I'm saying it's not morally justified to rape over and over again and impregnate a young girl in order to save New York City. And the utilitarian must bite the bullet and say it is.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a...
You're a virtue ethicist. You would say that would make you a fucking monster to do those horrible things.
Yeah, but even me as a virtue ethicist, like I would probably pull a lever, or like, you know,
would you do like would you do the organ donor one though?
As in like whatever, take someone's
yeah. Would you kill a healthy person to save 5 people's lives for their organs?
No, I would not.
Why?
Unless like they voluntarily donated the organs and like they died.
I would say that what's happening right now is that there's no conceivable difference between the two of these in any way, shape, or form. The only difference is your conservative mindset of disgust mechanism doesn't want to think about harvesting organs out of an innocent person to give to other people. And congratulations, you're slowly becoming a conservative.
Yeah, I'm not going to deny that I have a disgust mechanism. Like, for sure, I have a disgust mechanism.
Right.
I think it's just a matter of like how strong it is.
Right. And I would say that that's a poor way to determine the morality of situations, especially if one is morally unjustifiable and logically untrue. It's about the evaluation after the fact about what is right or wrong that is key here in terms of like what can actually be logically justified. This is an objective metric to determine things that are unjustifiable.
Yeah, but that to me, this is like more like what you outlined is thought experiment. Well, like more like the argumentation ethics, it's a thought experiment, but like when it comes to like it actually tracking in reality, like I don't think it tracks in reality like all that strongly. In terms of like, you know, with the trolley problem, like if it was my child on like one side of the track and like 10 people, 20 people, like no matter what, like I'm going to almost certainly save my child.
But the Piaget, like the problem is that neither does the trolley cart problem. Right? Because if you take a Piagetian aspect to it and you say it's morally justified to pull the lever to kill one person to save 5, what you're also saying is that it's morally justified to put 1,000 black people on a plantation to stop starvation in Africa.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
There's no difference. Right? There's no difference between the trolley car problem and saying that it is morally justified to pull the lever to kill one person to save 5 than to say that it is okay. Well, let's say illegal immigrants, to just round up illegal immigrants and put them on slave plantations in America so that we can grow more crops that will then feed people that are hungry in Africa. There's no difference between these two things. The difference is we localize it in a small portion of time. And it kind of makes sense to us. But when you talk about what is morally justified and you zoom out, what you've actually advocated for is plantation slavery of immigrants in America to stop starvation in Africa.
Yeah, so I'd agree with you. Like our moral intuitions can sometimes, maybe often, misguide us. I mean, we see this even when it comes to like whatever charity research or donation research of like, you know, starving Timmy next door, like people are willing to give, you know, starving Timmy lots of money, but then let's say if it's like 2 starving children in Africa, like yes, they each get $5, but if it's 3, like the math like never works out, and like people's more intuitions like just get so confused of like, you know, you should be like, it should just like mathematically like be a linear relationship of like the more children, the more you're willing to give, but like people obviously don't work like that in terms of like this purely objective calculation. And that's why it's like I just think we are just morally intuitive agents, and like it's good to like go through the logical arguments, but like it just they only have so much power or weight. And like if I'm trying to like solve, for example, intimate partner violence, it's probably not like getting them to logically recognize.
I agree with you, and I think that's one of the biggest faults of humanity thus far is that we're not more based on reason. That's part of the reason why my channel exists.
I would sort of make the argument of like, not that we're not based on reason enough, but rather we don't recognize that we are sort of subjective creatures enough, and that in order to,
you know what? So long as you recognize that when you claim all of these things that you're morally wrong and it's unjustifiable, I've done enough. I've done plenty of work.
Yes, I have no problem, like, yes, accepting your framework, and I will concede, like, sure, if I accept your framework, it is illogical. Just as, like, you are an illogical agent that you recognize.
Hey, you know what? I sent it to you, so if you can find a framework that proves argumentation ethics wrong, you'll be the first one.
I'm not looking to prove it wrong, just because, like, again, I don't think it tracks in reality of, like, you know, people that violate the non-aggression principle, like they're doing so for illogical reasons. They're doing it for largely sort of, they feel like it. And so like, how do you get people to like address their feelings? You have to recognize that they have feelings. I don't think it's like, it seems like you want to move into a world of like, people are just more like Data from Star Trek.
No, I want to move into a world where people don't violate the non-aggression principle and advocate for it.
Right. But in order to like, move in that direction, you probably would, like, it seems like Data from Star Trek would be the optimal candidate for this framework. Would that be like correct to say?
No.
Then who would be the optimal? Because like that is a perfectly logical agent, right?
I mean, if people were like Data from Star Trek, I mean, like, I don't know Star Trek lore that well. From what I understand, he was I mean, like, I don't want a bunch of autistic people walking around with like no empathy. You know what I mean? Like I don't, you know what I mean? Like, well, like would I prefer that people be more reasoned, be more like Data from Star Trek? I'd have to watch and care about Star Trek to like get it. And I know you're a Trekkie and it's like a good example for you, but like, I don't really know that much about Data from Star Trek other than he was an android that was hyper logical.
Yeah, well, pretty much like pure, and that's my point. That it seems like you even recognize yourself, like the importance of empathy. It's like you recognize that like that has a critical importance to our behavior.
Right, but argumentation ethics isn't a full moral framework of all of what is right and wrong. It is about refuting certain things so that we can have less conflict in the world, and then we can have freedom, and that rights aren't violated, which leads to a better world.
And so it seems like you would, I guess I shouldn't appeal to Star Trek since you're not a Trekkie. Unfortunately, you should be a Trekkie. And it's surprising to me that you're not a Trekkie since you're a Star Wars fan, but I understand.
I'm a big Star Wars fan, and I tried to watch Star Trek and I realized that it was just communist propaganda within like,
yeah, sure,
it was like pro scarcity world. And like, and it was just like, oh, this is just commie bullshit. I'm good. I mean, like, I never watched the original Star Trek, but I did watch like maybe like the first half of the first season of like the Picard, and I was just like, oh, this is commie propaganda. I'm good. This is boring.
Yeah, and like, I view it as like the direction of society is going, like, is leaning more towards like the hyper rational, and like the subjective experience is like being removed more and more, and I think it's just like largely going in the wrong direction. Like I think we need to recognize that we are feeling creatures, and it's through regulation of our feelings. For example, regulating our disgust. There's even research to back it up that if you can regulate a conservative's amount of disgust, or you decrease their disgust response, they tend to start espousing more left-leaning values. Or alternatively,
well, that's not right. I mean, we haven't determined whether or not that value is good.
Yes, I understand, but
disgust exists for a reason, right?
It does.
I mean, like,
I'm not saying
like one of the things we've looked at with disgust mechanism in like in countries like Africa and things like that, what we found is that when a virus spreads, right, that the political leanings of everybody tends to become more conservative as a form of protection, because of the discuss mechanism increasing. So there's obviously utility to discuss mechanism and conservatism.
No, for sure. And so that example that you brought of like a virus, I would also bring in terms of like threat detection or like the feelings of safety. Again, there's interesting psychological research of like, it seems like, you know, on average, okay, this is not universal to every single conservative, but like on average, like conservatives, they tend to have like a more sensitive threat response or more sensitive like stress response. And like feelings, feeling unsafe seems to, you know, generate a strong reaction in them. And like when they perceive
excluding SJWs.
Yeah, fair enough. Yes. But this is like rooted in neuroscience of like, you know, when they feel unsafe, they tend to like move more towards like conservatism or like, you know, they want security. And like, again, there's research showing that like, if you induce feelings of safety, again, you tend to like turn a conservative more into a liberal. Now,
yeah.
Some might say
and
that's an awful thing.
I would say that when you become an expert in something, you tend to become more reasoned in that thing. And that is kind of proof positive of the value of reason, right? Casimir says, I don't know about right wing or conservative, but he says that you become more conservative in your lab, right? You're focused on data, you're focused on what is objectively true, what is objectively false, and all of those things in the area that you are an expert in, right? I know maybe you wouldn't call yourself an expert because you're a PhD candidate, but compared to the layman, you're an expert in this, right? So I would say the same, that yeah, as a society, we should be more well-reasoned. We should be focused more on reason. We should be more like data, and that the society would be a better place if we made appeals to reason instead of appeals to altruism. The world would be a better place.
Okay, so yeah, I take your point in terms of like, I guess technically speaking, if every single human being on the planet were data from Star Trek, there would probably be like no conflict. Well, since I mean data consumes pretty much no resources or minimal resources. So, but that would be like, I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want to live in that world. I'm pretty sure you don't want to be data, even though you might not be familiar with it. But like, there's just like no subjective experience. Like you're pretty much like, you know, you're a computer at that point.
I mean, like, I don't know. I'd say we're kind of all computers anyways, but yeah, I get what you're saying.
But if we were all computers, we'd just be like this hyper-rational, and like all your decisions would be like this hyper-rational decision-making process. And it's like,
that would be true. Not. That would be somewhat true if argumentation ethics in terms of justification of moral claims was about things other than just the non-aggression principle. But it's not. What we're talking about is, should you be reasoned and logical when dealing with conflict with whether or not you should initiate conflict with other people? And the answer to that is unequivocally always yes. Everyone should always be like data from Star Trek.
Right. Okay, fair enough. But then again, it goes back to like my sort of original point of like how this tracks in reality, and like how do you solve sort of violence on a small scale, or violations of the non-aggression principle on a small scale, as in like,
I feel like that is a question for another time. I got to get water and I got to use the restroom and I got another panel I got to go on at midnight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fair enough. I take your
point.
But
dude, I love this. This was great. I really appreciate you coming through.
I enjoy it.
And the one thing I didn't get to is the fact that medical assistance in death is the 6th leading cause of death in Canada right now. But you know, another time. I'm actually pretty sure that that'll be a topic at some point once Eucharist comes back on Prime Kais, and you should pay attention to that. And if I get a DM, I'll make sure that you get on that as a Canadian.
Yeah, if anything,
on Prime Kai's panel.
Gladly. But yeah, I super grateful, super enjoy these conversations. Yeah, can't thank you enough, and also thank you to, even though I'm sure there's.
Are you in chat?
I'm sort of briefly checking chat.
Yeah, make sure you type your stuff out, because I think Cory Campbell is probably, because it's really important. I think sometimes when we watch content creators and content from like the other side, even if it's just to know your enemy, right? And if there was anybody I would suggest, it'd be Cory Campbell.
And also, very much appreciate and grateful for the raid yesterday.
Oh yeah,
Totally.
of course.
Super appreciated.
Well, just getting people in to be like, this is a guy I'm going to talk to tomorrow. Like, it just makes sense.
And yeah, even though I'm sure like virtually, I know Casimir strongly agrees with everything that I say. And if he wants to talk about it further, I'm pretty much always open.
As Casimir says, follow Cory Campbell. His science streams are very interesting. He is a true right-wing conservative in science.
Even though like nobody in science, at least in my circles, is conservative. And like
yeah, but they're
closed...
conservative with their expertise. That's the point.
Yeah, sure, fair enough. But that's like the halls of
and everything else they're left wing. Yeah, it's just how it tends to be.
And like behind closed doors.
At least that's yeah, that's Curtis Yarvin's argument, I believe. Mencius Molbug. That we're the things that we're an expert in, we tend to be very conservative with, and all the other things we're not an expert in, we tend to be less conservative with.
Yeah. And thank you for sending that document. I'm going to go through it. And like, I'm going to attempt to re-engage with it and see where
I would look for Hoppa's argumentation ethics primer is what you want to Google, because that's like a write-up with like examples and things, and it's like an article, as opposed to like mine is just the bullet points of like the logical things that are needed. So, but it's a shorthand for me so that I can like, because it's even difficult for me, like I don't have it memorized perfectly step by step. But I'm gonna get out of here. I got it. Like I said, we're gonna do a quick 3-minute ad break, boys. I'm gonna use the restroom, get some water, get some tea made, and then when we come back, we're gonna do a panel on the student loan forgiveness by the Biden administration.
Much appreciated. Thank you to everyone that's listening in chat, and also thank you for the criticisms. I'll try to do better next time. Take care and be well.
Take care. You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.